If this letter has reached its intended recipient, rather than the unknown hand and eye of an intrepid explorer a million years hence, then I have deduced correctly the current mechanical aim of your undoubtedly many ambitions, Miss Say. And I have frustrated them. If you are reading this letter, and you are alive and sane, then I congratulate you on the fruit of your work. It is remarkable beyond accounting, but in the interest of my personal safety and the safety of my associates, I have headed you off at the pass, if you will forgive the playful turn of phrase. Preem read out loud, in the gathered silence of our stilled breath. You seek to recreate the work of Henel and Zypherdus, founded upon rumors of the Great Seal beneath Heliopolis, mentioned in at least 2 of the books which I know reside in your collection. You seek dominion in a sense that cannot be allowed if you are not to become as your mother was, a metastasizing cancer to be cut out by either the body politic or the secret swift terrible hand of God. So, you will perceive that the book you seek is no longer here. I do not know which other fabled tomes you wish to borrow from this miracle of a place, if any, but this one avenue I have closed to you, and will meet you with its weapons if you still seek dominion. Preem's voice, bell-clear and smooth and impassive, could not conceal the amused self-satisfied arrogance dripping from the single unfolded sheet of paper in her hands. An owlish face, liver-spotted and gray, peered back at us from between the lines of ink. How have I achieved this miracle, you may ask? By copying yours. His handwriting was all messy spikes and loops, like a doctor's hasty note-taking. I cannot take credit for the work that has breached the mysteries of physical access to the beyond. That glory belongs to your genius, and, I suspect, a touch of help from my clever niece. A certain agent memorized the shape of your door, the lines of your work, the tools required to cut through the outer wall that keeps us trammeled within our cradle. I had hoped to conceal this theft from you, but you perceive I am forced to tip my hand, to halt you from worse violences upon my person. You may also take this letter as my answer to your 2 conditions. On the matter of criminal activity within Sharrowford, we are in agreement. Neither I nor any of my associates will commit any crimes, as defined in British law, within the city of Sharrowford, against yourself or any other inhabitant. As Preem read, Lozzie began to shiver inside her poncho. I pulled her close and hugged her tight. On the matter of my niece, Lauren Lilburn, we are not in agreement. Upon my resumption of her custody, I am willing to share with you such passages in the Testament of Heliopolis as concern the limited aims of predefined work, the boundaries of which we may discuss as equals when, and only when, my property has been returned to me. Please, Preem, stop, I murmured. To begin this process, Preem kept reading, you may contact my lawyer at his public offices. He has been instructed to expect dash. Stop, Evelyn commanded. She barely got the word out. Evelyn had turned from pale to green to a most dangerous shade of flushed crimson. Her knuckles were white on the handle of her walking stick, her eyes blazing, a twitch in her cheek. Perhaps this wasn't chiefmost in our concerns right then, but I was worried Evelyn was going to give herself a stomach ulcer from sheer anger. Preem lowered the letter. She'd found no tricks or traps, no poison impregnated into the paper, no magical trigger in the torn open envelope. It was genuine, and she didn't need to finish. Only one of us was blissfully unaware whose barely legible signature graced the foot of the page, beneath a bland, yours sincerely. It's from Eddie Boy, right? Rain asked quickly, with the corner of her mouth. We were all shocked, but Rain was the only one already in action. She'd turned outward toward the far end of the bookcase corridor, where the library floor opened out into the wide space of the collapsed and cratered wreckage of thousands of bookshelves. The unknown. She had her homemade riot shield up and her handgun drawn, eyes alert, head tilted to listen for the tiniest sound. Rain, you think this is a trap? I hissed. As I spoke, Zheng moved past me to flank Rain, head raised, eyes hooded, hands flexing. Don't know, Rain murmured. Everyone speaks soft like. Eddie Boy, Preem echoed. Yes. Oh, but that's absurd, I said but kept my voice low, swallowing hard and trying not to shudder. Lozzie had buried her face in my shoulder, clinging to me like a small animal. I found myself listening too, wondering if we'd hear the telltale creak of a boot along a parallel stack of shelves. We're not in Sharrowford, we're not even in reality, we're outside. How could he have dash? Hush, wizard, Jing purred. Who else? Evelyn swung her walking stick and struck the edge of the bookcase from which Preem had pulled the hated letter. The clunk of wood on wood traveled no further than our ears, soaked up by the fabric of the library. He must have seen our gateway after he stepped through it, that whole home invasion thing was a setup. For all of a single second, I said, shaking my head. Surely he couldn't dash. Hey, left hand, Rain said softly. Hear anything? Smell anything? Jing blinked once. Oil, metal, sweat and fear. Fresh. You don't think they're still here, do you? I asked. In my arms, Lozzie shook her head and whined. With careful economy of motion, Rain looked round see at the absence on the bookshelf, the empty space where the Testament of Heliopolis should have lain, nestled between its leather-bound fellows. She turned back before speaking, but not before meeting my eyes and making sure I was where I was meant to be standing. That book hasn't been gone for long. No gathered dust in the gap, she said. That was taken minutes or hours ago, not days or weeks. Yeah, they might still be here. No, Lozzie whined into my shoulder. They might still be here, Evelyn echoed, eyes lighting up. We hunt, Jing purred. She flexed her neck, cracking vertebrae, and reminded me of a tiger waking from a nap. Oh no, big girl, absolutely not, Rain said, the hint of a laugh in her voice. We get the hell back home, lickety-split. Lozzie, can you do that for us, right now? They have my book. Evelyn whirled on Rain, blazing with renewed fury. Evie dash, I said, but she was beyond help. Nobody else can have access to this place, she went on, spitting with rage. They have a working gateway, Rain. They have access to outside. God willing they'll all get themselves killed before they can do any real damage, but they cannot have this, they cannot have these books, this is mine dash Evelyn slammed to a halt and the blood drained from her face. I mean they cannot be allowed to abuse this knowledge if they're still here. Too much of a coincidence, Rain murmured. We're both here at the same time, after we take days to come back. This stinks. Incident pit, remember? Please, a tiny voice quivered, and Lozzie's golden head rose from my shoulder. Her eyes flickered back and forth, breath shaking in her slender chest pressed to mine, shivering in a way that tore at my heart. Please. Jing, please hunt him, please dash. Quite, we're not turning Lauren over to her uncle, Evelyn said with a hard swallow. Over my dead body. Not even a question, Rain said, placating but tight-voiced. But that doesn't mean we walk into a trap, we need to dash. Please dash. We hunt, Jing purred. She turned to me, locking those sharp, dark eyes with mine in paralysis. Shaman, we have this one chance. We have already scented the prey. Command me. I don't know, I said. I really didn't. Evelyn was falling apart on some emotional level I didn't understand. Lozzie was terrified. Rain's protective instincts were not wrong, but abyssal ruthlessness crept up my spine and forced my lips to linger. Heather's not in charge right now, Rain said. The shaman is always dash. Please, Lozzie whined. Please get rid of him, please, get him now, get dash. Pop. A firework pop crack. Distant and high-pitched. Deceptively soft, truncated and blunt, nothing like in films or on television. The sound cut through the thick silent shroud that lay over the library. It came perhaps from across the collapsed crater, perhaps deeper, perhaps elsewhere, lost in muffled infinity as the library ate all echoes. It passed through us and over us and the silence returned, heavier and deeper, as if offended by this interruption. Rain took a step back, covered Lozzie and I with her shield. Pop pop. Twice more. Identical. Speak of the devil, Rain murmured. What was that? I whispered, harsh and close, as if to speak too loudly might provoke the silence itself to crash down on us. Some invisible quality in the air of the library had changed. My gut told me that to raise my voice was to invite attention. My phantom limbs, the ghostly mirror of my secret abyssal body, were trying to pull in tight and secure like an octopus cramming itself into a tiny crack. Instinct screamed at me to stay very still and go very quiet. Gunshots, Rain said, and I cringed at the volume of her voice, though she stayed soft. Left hand. That way, Zheng rumbled, nodding ahead into the depths of the cratered mass of splintered wood and torn books. Down. Gunshots. Evelyn hissed white-cold in the face. It's them, it has to be them. Pop pop, pop 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 pop. Individual crack pops slewed into a mechanical jutter that seemed to go on and on and on, tearing through the air with a machine sound alien to this outside place. Beneath the noise, I thought I heard a shout lost in the depths of the labyrinth, and perhaps a thump, muffled far below. Just when it seemed the metal racket would go on forever, the noise cut out far more suddenly than it had begun. Then a shout, a human voice, unmistakable this time. Too far away behind the maze of books to make out the words. Running feet. An impact of metal on wood. And a crackle. An awful, spine-jarring crackle, just beyond the edge of hearing, like nails down a blackboard from a closed room. A fight, Zheng purred, smiling sharp. A losing one, said Rain. That was a mag dump. A what? I asked. Magazine dump, Rain said. Somebody firing off all their bullets at once in panic. Eddie Boy's friends got themselves in trouble. Good, Evelyn snarled. Then we can dash. Never interrupt your opponent while he's screwing up, Rain spoke over her. It's not a bloody trap, Rain, it dash. Rain nodded behind us, and I looked back to see Saldy's sphere machine had sealed up its blocky gray front. The mage was presumably inside, and not talking to us. That distant, spine-raking crackle passed through the air again, setting my teeth on edge. Coward, Zheng purred at Saldy's machine. Horndog's hamster ball decided it's time to close the hatches, Rain said. That means we're leaving too. Lozzie. They are minutes away from us, at most, Evelyn hissed. And they have my book. I really hope he's dead, Lozzie squeaked, face white and pinched. Hey, we can figure that out later. Rain shot Lozzie a warm smile. I promise. My teeth itch for flesh, Yashu, Zheng rumbled. We do need that book, I said out loud, my voice shaking only very slightly. And I'm not trading Lozzie for it. And Edward hides too well in Sharrowford, we all know that, how hard it is to find him. If that's him, or his men, and they're in the middle of making a mistake, then I would very much like to capitalize on the opportunity. Everybody looked at me. I rolled my eyes and sighed. If you know what I mean. Rain glanced around at four defiant faces: myself, Lozzie, Evelyn, and Zheng. Only Preem declined to offer an opinion, along with the eyeless gaze of the squid-faced librarian that had led us here, waiting without complaint, as if watching our debate. That awful crackle came once more, a creeping, crawling of spiked ice up the inside of my skull. Even Lozzie winced. Always, Preem intoned. Left hand, you're in front, Rain continued. I'm guessing you can eat bullets for breakfast if you gotta. What do you think? Zheng rumbled. But you do not command me dash. No, that's the condition, Rain said softly, far more dangerous than any empty-headed, boastful insult she'd thrown at Zheng over the last couple of weeks. She twitched, muscles taut in a way that presaged violence, enough to make me flinch and shiver. We're walking into a fight, and there's a gun down there. I'm not having anybody getting shot. I'm in charge now. Zheng stared at her in heavy-lidded silence. "Zheng, please," I said quickly. The giant demon host rumbled in her throat like a tiger disturbed in its sleep. But when Preem extracted a cloth-tied nut to throw ahead of us, when it bounced along the wooden floor and rolled to a precise stop at the end of the bookcase corridor, Zheng went first on silent feet. The rest of us followed. Rain had her pistol out. I stayed close. We left our waiting librarian guide behind. Salties trailed in our rear, wordless and faceless inside her gray sphere. Evelyn's estimate was not wrong. As the crow flies, we were perhaps but 30 seconds away from the other library users. If it hadn't been for the tangled rubble of collapsed floors, we could probably have spied them down below, but the broken spars of shattered wood and avalanche falls of hundreds of thousands of books blocked both sight and path, forced us into a labyrinth within a labyrinth. This collapsed crater was old enough that the squid-faced librarians had cut new paths through the wreckage, winding like mountain passes between craggy peaks of shattered floor, lit from above by surviving light globes in the ceiling and from the stubs of wooden pillars, like the broken legs of giants. Picking our way through this petrified forest consumed perhaps 2 or 3 precious minutes, despite applying a sped-up version of our usual process. Preem threw nuts and we left them behind as Zheng raced ahead, stalking like a nightmare from the jungle as she hunched, rounded her shoulders, bared her teeth. "She'll run into something she can't survive," Evelyn hissed. "Heather, call her back." "Guess she's the canary now," Rain murmured. But Zheng wasn't listening, not to me. She smelled blood. The fight wasn't over. As we hurried through the shattered mess, clearer sounds reached us, a shouted jumble of words caught on the silence-thickened air, a clatter followed by more of that spine-creeping crackle which made all the hairs stand up on the back of my neck, and made Lozzie whine deep in her throat. Just before we made contact, somebody started shooting again. We were close enough to pick out a metallic click and ratchet, which Rain later explained was the sound of expert hands swapping in a fresh magazine and yanking back a bolt. And then the pop rip of a finger jammed on a trigger and not letting go. This close, the sound was harsh and horrible, a machine rasp punctuated by the thwack and crump of bullets chewing into paper and wood. Rain shoved me and Lozzie down behind her shield, and Preem forced Evelyn to duck just in case, but the bullets weren't aimed anywhere near us. The sound stopped. A man screamed at the top of his lungs. The crackle lashed out like a bolt of lightning. 10 quick paces and 1 turn in the path later, we almost slammed right into a line of squid-faced librarians, facing away from us. Zheng scattered them with a low growl, wading through them as they ran in all directions, grey robes flapping. Just beyond where they'd stood was a drop, the lip of a second layer of crater, a scree slope of 1,000,000 books. We all skidded to a halt. Rain blocked me with her shield, but she didn't need to. Even Zheng stopped, to stare, the fight momentarily gone out of her. Below us was a wide clear space, dotted with a few toppled bookshelves, a section of the floor beneath the one which had collapsed long ago, spread out beneath us like the boards of a stage. And all around the rim of this crater, peering from between bookshelves and around stacked tomes, shoulder to shoulder in eyeless audience, stood hundreds of squid-faced librarians, watching events unfold in jostling silence. This was the line we had disturbed and broken. It did not take a literature student to see the logic. "Oh, damn you, Seven Shades, you promised," I hissed. 3 connected scenes were concluding on the floor below, the final acts of a tragic farce playing out its last bloody movements. A gateway much like our own shone with earthly light on the back wall of the library canyon, down at floor level to our right. Through that door I saw a hint of dark concrete and scuffed hazard tape. 3 figures were scrambling through, back to our reality, in a tangle of blood-slick panic. In the middle of the floor, a familiar figure of whipcord muscle and steel wire tendon crouched behind a fallen bookshelf, dressed in gray athletic wear and a military-style harness of pouches and webbing, clutching a stubby black weapon to her chest. Amy Stack, raincoat hood falling back as she turned. We'd caught her in the act of turning to her fleeing comrades, a shout on her lips as they tumbled free of the library, as one of them turned back with an ugly curse at her, which contained words I will not repeat here. Behind him, on the far side of the gateway, another figure gray-haired and owlish made quick motions with his hands. The gateway slid shut, leaving Stack to face her fate alone. Stage left was a monster, eating a man. I don't use that word lightly. The old Heather, the Heather of 6 months or 5 years ago, she thought the very spirit life of our own world were monsters, when they can be as kind as I or Rain or Lazi, just a different form of life. Zheng is not a monster either, despite what I once thought. She is a thinking, feeling being, capable of love and pain and sorrow, and that word presupposes a specific kind of judgment. Evelyn's mother was a monster. Alexander Lilban was a monster. I had yet to decide if the eye was a monster. Black lightning, 12 feet tall. A little like a tree and a little like a jellyfish, but nothing like either of those things, a fractal shape cut into the air with such angular precision that the lines seemed to hurt the eye. Moving like a slow-motion explosion, iterating itself forward as its rear folded up into nothingness, jagged branches expanding into the air. There was nothing animal, nothing living about it, nothing spirit either, nothing translatable to our manner or matter of life. This was not pneumosomatic. It was not flesh. It was something else. Outsider. In truth, it was probably more animal than evil, perhaps just curious, or feeding. Had they disturbed it here, in the library of Carcosa? Another experiment gone wrong, at the cost of poor, sad lives? Or perhaps it wasn't from the library in the first place. Perhaps it was like us, a visitor from elsewhere. Perhaps this was all an accident, or a misunderstanding, out here in the unknowable spaces beyond. It had a man snagged in the clutches of a branch of fractal expansion, attached to his head like electric hair. He was thick-set and heavily muscled, wearing a webbed and pouched harness like Stack, but had been caught in the open, or perhaps he had been running for the gateway, or maybe he'd charged the thing. His muscles danced and jerked, boots skittering across the floorboards, bowels voided in a mess at his feet, eyes rolled back, lips running with bloody drool as the black lightning triggered every nerve in his body, rooted his spine and pithed his soul. All of this I pieced together later, from different aspects each of us had focused on in the moment of violence and horror. At the time it was impossible, in the black light of that self-iterating soul eater. But I think all of us saw Stack's little motion with her gun. Her gritted teeth. Her cold set eyes. The muzzle she pressed to the soft flesh beneath her own chin, as the black lightning expanded toward her. Amy Stack was a nasty piece of work, a professional killer and thug, who had evidently lied to us that she was getting out of the business of serving mages in return for money. I had little doubt that if our positions had been reversed, she would have left us to die, or even turned her gun on us to make certain. But in the face of that unnatural flicker of fractal black lightning, the fellow feeling of one living being for another was impossible to ignore. I would like to say that's why I broke from behind Rain's shield, why I scrambled and slid and slipped down the scree slope of tumbled books, heart in my mouth and head numb with fear. I dearly wish to blame the milk of human kindness for my insane act of running out between a nightmare and a psychopath with a gun, out of breath and shaking with half-healed bruises in my flanks, as Rain sprinted after me and Zheng came barreling down like a cannonball and Lazi started singing. I would like to blame how much of a nice person I am, but I am not a nice person. I am half of the abyss, and abyssal ruthlessness told me we needed a live captive. So with a skid and a slip and a shudder, I stood before 12 feet of black lightning. I had kept my promise to 7 shades of sunlight. I had rushed on stage, to interrupt the play. Tendrils of fractal touch expanded toward my face. This close I could see them splitting and splitting and splitting again, down into fibers almost invisible to the naked eye. This was the source of the spine-raking crackle in the air, as the black lightning moved by tearing reality. I narrowly resisted an urge to hiss and spit at thing. Very lucky, because while that would have felt good, it probably wouldn't have worked. The necessary brain math sliced sharp and hot up from the sump in the pit of my soul, as if drawn through a surface of sticky mucus and clinging tar, ripped from the depths at the speed of thought, leaving my mind chafed raw by its passage. This would require no long weaving of hyperdimensional miracle, no complex interplay of the eye's lessons and deduced cosmic principles. The black lightning creature's body was determined by a visible and obvious mathematics, just as the human body's mathematical form might be obvious to the senses of some other order of being. The equation was simple: leave a number hanging, an addition unfinished, a decimal left over unaccounted for. A moment of chaos and confusion was exploding around me as I summoned the equation. Rain skidded to a halt feet away from me, stopped by a shout from Evelyn high up the slope of books. "No, don't touch it." As Zheng bounced and bounded like a leaping tiger, behind me, slamming into something and flinging splinters of shredded floorboard up into the air. My stomach clenched in rebellious pain and a pair of ice picks lanced through the backs of my eyeballs, into my skull, a sharp shudder as my soft human meat struggled still with the transcendent truth of reality, as I gripped the black, dripping levers behind mere matter, and pulled them. Lazzie's singing suddenly cut out, and split-second panic almost broke my concentration. Black lightning struck for my head, my brain, my nervous system and snapped. The creature's perfect fractal expansion exploded in 7 places along its snake-like form, losing coherence as its body tried to follow the new principles I had added to its structure, the nonsense I had introduced. It reared back, whipping about like a severed fire hose, dropping the twitching corpse of the man it had finished killing. Black light lashed across fallen books, across our faces, across the dull brown floorboards of Carcosa and the hundreds of librarians watching in the audience above. Rain caught me as I staggered back into her arms, my nose streaming with blood, my head pounding like a struck bell. I wheezed and kicked and clung to her. "Holy shit, Heather, what did you do?" she breathed. "I think I gave it cancer." Eyes whirling across the strobing black, I looked up the slope of books, where Evelyn cowered behind Preem, and where Lozzie stood no more. "Where's Lozzie?" I croaked in growing panic. "Rain, where's Lozzie, where'd she dash?" But Rain knocked the breath out of my sore lungs, yanking me behind her homemade riot shield. I caught a whirling split-second vision of the other fight still unfolding behind us, of Amy Stack, blank-faced and flint-eyed, pointing a sleek metal tube past Zheng's flicker-fast motion, right at me. "Pardon my language. Never would say that out loud." Zheng roared. Rain had me sprawled on the floor. The crackle scratched the inside of my eyeballs and the black lightning outsider was not done yet. Like the animal it was, it recovered and lashed out in panic, an explosion unleashed, a radial ball of fractal chaos, iterating itself in every direction at once. Nowhere to shelter. Mere matter would be no obstacle. Then, a blink of steel. Wall and lance of mirrored chrome, armor cut for troll or giant, twice the height of Lozzie who had appeared with it, behind it, sheltered in its lee as the onrush of black lightning battered against the tower of a shield. Another of Lozzie's knights. "Make it go away!" Lozzie screamed. The knight in shining armor, steel rapidly blackening under the lightning's onslaught, smoke seeping from the joint seams, thrust its lance into the tangled web of expanding fractal mess with an arm like a steam piston. There was a soft pop-bang sound, the meaning of which would haunt me for weeks. The black lightning whipped back like an animal from a naked fire, like a sea snake from a shark. Expansion halted. It fled into the depths of the library with a motion like smoke caught on sudden wind. Silence fluttered down on us. "Heather!" Lozzie flung herself at me on the floor, almost crying as she wrapped her arms around my neck. "Are you okay? You're okay. It almost touched you, and touching you is bad. You're not invincible either. You're not supposed to be. You're soft and squishy, and it was my fault, my fault. I'm so sorry. I made us all come over here. I shouldn't have. He wasn't even here." And dash. Lozzie kept talking as I returned her hug with numb, shaking arms. Her knight stood immobile behind her, armor charred all down front and sides, black meaty smoke pouring from the seams in the metal. A smell like roast pork filled the air. A flat, focused voice was speaking from behind me, but the words didn't penetrate my brain. Somebody else was breathing sharp and hard, hissing through their teeth. Shaman, Zheng said urgent. That almost did the trick. It took me a further confused moment to realize that Rain wasn't on top of me anymore. I twisted round on the floor, dragging Lozzie with me, looking for my lover. Behind us, Zheng had Amy Stack pinned to the ground, face down, one knee digging into the small of her back, one hand around a wrist, the other hand pressed to the fragile egg of her shaved skull. Evidently Zheng had understood my intention, which is why she hadn't gutted the mercenary the moment they'd made contact. Stack's flint-cold eyes met mine. Her gun, an ugly collection of black metal surfaces and cylinders, lay kicked to a safe distance. Rain was slumped on her backside, shield abandoned. She was shaking all over as she forced slow, steady breaths through gritted teeth. White as a sheet, covered in a sheen of cold sweat, both hands gripping hard around her own left thigh. Those hands and thigh were coated in bright blood, a slow crimson wave soaking into her jeans. "Oh no," went Lozzie, very small. "Rain!" I croaked, and staggered to my feet. "Shot me with her last bullet," Rain laughed through a trio of hyperventilating breaths, and pulled a rictus grin. "She was gonna shoot at you, couldn't let it. It's fine, it's fine. It's a flesh wound. I'm in shock. In shock. Shock. It's not an artery, just a flesh wound. Not an artery. I'm fine." "You know, Rain, you're not fine, don't be silly," I said haltingly, surprised by how calm I sounded, while inside I went very cold. "You've been shot. Gotta learn how to take a punch in the face, you know," she said, wheezing. This wasn't Lozzie's fault, it was mine. I swallowed a hiccup. "Right. Okay. We all need to get out of here, right now, Loz dash." "Morel," Stack said, level and blank. "I shot her, and she's going to bleed out." "I'll do you too." "Bleed out?" Rain laughed, shaking and heaving the last few puffs. "Don't be ridiculous, this is nothing. I'll walk it off." "Shaman," Jing snapped. "Shaman, look up. I cannot pin this prize and be elsewhere too. I would break her legs, but she will choke herself on her own tongue. Look up, Shaman." I didn't hear Zheng's words. I only saw Rain's blood running through her fingers as she applied pressure to a bullet wound. A bullet wound. This was absurd. I couldn't process the fact. "Kill me," Stack said. "Go on. Do it. Order Zheng to do it. Snap my neck. Do it. Do it or I'll kill everyone you love." "What?" I blinked at her. "And no, Zheng, don't, we need her, we dash." Stack twisted in Zheng's grip like a ferret in a snare, got her other arm free from beneath her body, and drew a compact silvered knife from somewhere deep in her combat webbing. Rain tried to stagger to her feet, assuming Stack was going for me or something equally ridiculous, but the assassin thrust the knife toward her own exposed throat. Zheng caught the blade in her bare hand before Stack could commit suicide. Wordless, straining against an impossible strength, Stack went red in the face, muscles bunching in her neck, eyes staring as she tried to overcome Zheng's grip and plunged the knife into her own windpipe. "What the, wow." "Okay then," Rain muttered, and slipped on one knee. I thought she was about to go over, pass out. "Shaman," Zheng all but shouted at me, like a roaring tiger. "Look up." If Zheng had intended to snap me out of panic, she failed. Being shouted at by a 7-foot slab of muscle and teeth amid all this madness was more likely to make me wet myself. But the urgency in her words was enough to make me obey, jerk my head, and look up. Preem lay halfway down the scree slope of tumbled books, looking like she'd been hit by lightning. Which, in a way, she had. Mercy of mercies, she was at least sitting up and blinking her blank milk-white eyes, but she was twitching and flexing, like a human suffering full-body nerve compression, pins and needles in every muscle. Her sheet of blonde hair was singed at the tips, curled up here and there by heat, and her crisply elegant maid uniform was scorched and burned through in several places, the skirt ruined beyond repair, black tights laddered all over. She'd lost a single shoe, which somehow bothered me. Salty's sealed grey machine had been struck as well, scorched and soot across the front with a spiderweb of lightning, but otherwise unmoved, up above us, alongside the audience of watching librarians. Sealed, she offered us no help. The sports bags Preem had carried had suffered too, half burst open by the attack. A split carrier bag of cloth-wrapped nuts was spilling its contents down the slope in a slow fall of tumbling metal, punctuated by water bottles and cereal bars and the contents of a first aid kit. A blackened twist of cooked meat lay at her feet, the corpse of a rabbit, surrounded by the sundered shell of spells and old towels and torn fabric. Evelyn's possessed carnivorous time bomb. Preem must have thrust it forward, or let it free, at the moment the black lightning had reached her. The dead rabbit, or more precisely the demon inside it, had taken the brunt of the attack and saved Preem's life. And Preem had saved Evelyn's, by flinging herself in front of her mistress. Evelyn, untouched and unharmed, up above us on the ragged edge of the upper floor from which we had descended. Evelyn, alone but for the audience of watching librarians. Evelyn, eyes and head turned away from the stage, away from us, framed like a painting by the wood and the books, as her lips moved to speak an unheard word to unseen listener, just behind the nearest bookcase. A frame from a silent film, without music or caption, as inscrutable as a missing page. Evelyn, nodding once as 5 squid-faced librarians approached with gentle hands and soft assurances, and took her by shoulder and elbow, to lead her willingly off into the library. "Evie!" I screamed, and surged to my feet. But she neither heard nor turned to look. She had already seen and heard something which mattered more than everything else in her life. She clacked her walking stick forward on the floorboards with a sound that resonated in the lingering silence, and stepped toward the blind spot behind the nearest bookcase. I was meant to see. From that angle. At that exact moment. Stage and audience had switched roles. I began an equation, dredged up the necessary pieces to knock dead everything around Evelyn and blast the bookshelves to cinders and break both of her legs. Lozzie was wide-eyed and white-faced, putting all of her strength into just holding me up as I shook and shuddered in brain math aftershock. Rain lurched to her feet again and shouted after Evie, both hands clamped around her own thigh, blood soaking down her trouser leg to the top of her boot. Preem had turned on the slope of books, slipping and sliding as she tried to regain fine motor control and climb after Evelyn, but her strength and speed was slow to return, and she slipped down 2 feet for each she gained. Climbing the slope would take many minutes. Too slow. Twill should have been there. Twill would have healed from a bullet wound in seconds, shrugged off lightning, launched herself up that slope with unstoppable energy in young love's devotion. But Twill was not here, because Evelyn had insisted. Had we been set up? Had Seven Shades said something to Evelyn or Twill, behind all our backs? One piece of unseen sabotage, and all of us were undone. Pull a single thread, it unravels the whole tapestry. If I used brain math now, I could halt Evelyn and wound her, badly, and probably pass out myself. And then who would rally Lozzie to get Rain home before Rain lost too much blood? Who would drag Evelyn down from that slope, or fix whatever was wrong with Preem? Who would avoid losing all of us at once? Who would get us safely home in one piece? So as Evelyn stepped behind that bookcase, as the sound of her walking stick clacked away down a corridor of shelves and ancient tomes, I made a cold, calculating, abyssal survivalist decision. I let go of the equation. I let Evelyn go. Part of me, the soft human part that loved her, that part was screaming. I was shaking, struggling to control the fear of what I'd just let happen, struggling to tell myself this was the right decision, and also struggling not to vomit all over my shoes as the pain of aborted brain math made me double up and whine like a stuck pig. Zheng still had stack pinned to the ground. "Shaman," she grunted. "I know," I slurred. "Shaman dash." "I know." I put force into my voice, and with every ounce of strength I had, I took Lozzie by the shoulders and peeled her off me, and stood on my own 2 feet, shaking with the effort. Heather, Heather, Heather. Where Evie went dash. The clack of Evelyn's walking stick was still audible, clicking off into the depths of the library, but receding. There was still time. Lozzie, I said. You have to take everyone else back home, right now. Lozzie's face collapsed into horror. No, no. Heathy, I can take another night, I can be there and then here and where Evie is in 1 step, I know I can, I think I can, I dash. Evie. Rain shouted, and I'd never heard her so panicked. She took 1 broken step toward the slope of books, and I genuinely thought she was going to hurl herself upward with a bullet hole still in her thigh. But she halted and winced deep with pain, gritting her teeth, swearing in a long stream under her breath. A few feet away, Preem slid to the bottom of the slope and stood up, swaying, staring upward after the sound of Evelyn's walking stick. Preem, I called, trying to keep my voice free of panic. Are you able to walk now? Can you dash? Yes, she intoned. Evelyn. Now. Yes, I know. Lozzie, please, I said, and I hiccuped. Lozzie shook her head, on the verge of tears. Not leaving Evelyn behind, Rain wheezed through deep breaths. Yes, I am not suggesting we leave Evelyn behind. I'd sooner suggest you shoot me, I said, exasperated beyond thought, then hiccuped a second time and focused on Lozzie. Rain needs medical attention, right now, and she's losing a lot of blood. Jing cannot let go of Stack, and we need her. Lozzie, you have to take them home. Please, you have to do this for me. I need you to. But dash. Preem and I will follow Evie and bring her back. I may need to use brain math, Preem can carry me. And we don't have time to spare, and I won't be able to think straight if Rain is hurt, and please don't make me say this all again because I am very terrified right now. Lozzie, please. Tearing up, biting her bottom lip, Lozzie nodded. Grab everyone, I said. Lozzie whirled away from me, pastel poncho flaring out as she skipped over to Rain and gently took her by the shoulder. Heather, Rain wheezed. No, you, Evie, I can't dash. You know I'm right, I told her, as clear-eyed and clear-headed as I could make myself. Rain, you've been shot. I can't think, I'm so scared. Let me find Evie. I've done this before. I can do it. I know outside. Rain didn't answer. She tried to smile, for me. A pain deeper than mere physical wound twisted her face into a rictus grin. Preem staggered up next to me as Lozzie reached out her other hand to touch Zheng's shoulder, to complete her circuit. Beneath Zheng's grip, Amy Stack had closed her eyes in quiet resignation, her knife limp in her hand. Are you sure you've recovered? I asked Preem. Can you walk? I might be able to do this alone, I dash. Preem shoved 2 books, the 2 blasted books we'd recovered from this accursed trip, under Lozzie's arm, and folded her poncho upward to cradle them, then turned to me. My purpose is to protect Evelyn. Do not instruct me otherwise, she sing-songed, staring right back into my eyes with milk-white clarity. Help me. Ready. Lozzie told me, still white-faced, sad-eyed, worried beyond words. Shaman, Zheng purred. She didn't need to add any other words. Zheng. Tie Stack up and dash. I do not need to be told, Shaman, Zheng purred. She sounded deeply unhappy. I nodded. Right. Of course. Sorry. Lozzie promised me to call for help for Rain as soon as you get back in the house. An ambulance. The first aid kit is in the cupboard to the left of the sink. Rain puffed out a laugh. How do we explain a bullet dash? I don't care. I almost shouted at her. Lozzie, call for help. Lozzie nodded, very serious. And call, I almost didn't say it. Call Twill. Call Twill, tell her what's happened. Get her over to the house. Get her, just tell her to be there. I'll be back with Evelyn. I promise I'll be back. Heather, Rain croaked. Don't do this alone. I love you. Go, I'll see you later, I told Lozzie, and could not look at the species of pain in Rain's eyes. Lozzie sobbed once. And with no pop of air, no click of heels, no sparkle or spark or shimmer, Lozzie was gone from the library of Carcosa. She took Rain with her, and Zheng, and Amy Stack pinned to the floorboards, our prize won by a price too high. Guilt rushed in to fill the silence. Preem and I were left alone together, in the gathering quiet. The clack-clack-clack of Evelyn's walking stick slowly receded into the depths of the library. The watching ring of hundreds of squid-faced librarians made no sound, alongside the closed grey sphere of Saldies in her machine. Closer to hand, Lozzie's charred and cooked knight stood dead and immobile, metal ticking as it cooled. Evelyn, Preem intoned. Yes, I said, and leaned on the arm she offered me as support. Come on, up the slope, after her. You'll have to drag me a little, I'm sorry. I will drag both of you, Preem sang. With her iron grip around my waist, and my arm about her shoulders, Preem dragged me up the scree slope of a million books, chasing Evelyn. Climbing the slope was like trying to walk on a carpet of loose rocks, slipping and skidding beneath our feet, stray volumes sliding down to the abandoned stage floor below. Even hale and well rested, that climb would take me 15 or 20 minutes, and only Preem's inhuman stamina won us the ragged lip of the wooden crater. She dragged me up without mercy, pulled on my bruises, scraped my knees. I would not have asked her to do otherwise. We could ill afford to wait for full strength to return to my legs. The clacking sound of Evelyn's walking stick was already leaving us behind. In the wake of the violence and the shouting and the gunshots, an oppressive silence had settled on the library of Carcosa, broken only by that clack-clack-clack. Each distant tap against the floorboards made my heart shudder. Evelyn was sinking beneath the waves, Preem and I could not dive fast enough. In a moment of absurdity which probably masked growing panic, I was thankful we'd never purchased Evelyn a proper, modern replacement walking stick, with a good rubber tip. Thank Dash, I panted as Preem allowed me to put my full weight back on my own 2 feet. Once we were off the slope, up alongside the squid-faced librarians and Saldi's sealed grey sphere, silent and still. Even with Preem dragging me, the climb had devoured what little energy I had left, after the brain math earlier. Thank you, Preem. Yes. Evelyn, Preem intoned at full volume. Yes, yes, right now. No, no rest. Give me your arm. I groped for her again, caught support, and cast a last thoughtless glance down at the floor of the makeshift amphitheater. The echo of Edward Lilburn's gate in the far wall. The corpse of the unfortunate unnamed man drained and devoured by the touch of the outsider. The battle damage and bullet holes and patches of lightning-etched floorboard. I dearly wished I could have tarried to examine Lozzie's knight in more detail. The strange noble shining thing had saved us and been cooked inside its armor by a brush with the black lightning, like a loyal boarhound throwing itself in front of its beloved master. Discolored and scorched all down the front, lance point embedded in the library floorboards, tower shield collapsed to one side, visorless, eyeless, featureless helmet slumped forward, it would stand here as a monument that none but us would comprehend, and I very much doubted we would ever return to this spot. Would some mage discover it one day, a lonely eternal grave among the toppled bookshelves and bullet holes and bones? Or perhaps a library visitor as unimaginable to us as we had been to the Black Lightning? Would they wonder what it meant, what manner of creature died here, and why? It had saved our lives, it deserved a better funeral than abandonment, whatever truly lay burnt and blackened inside that armor. Rain's blood was drying on the floorboards not 12 feet from the dead knight, wet and sticky in the unhealthy light of the library glowstones. I didn't need a psychologist's professional opinion, all these fleeting, poetic thoughts about the dead knight were deflection. If Amy Stack's final bullet had passed a few inches further north, it would be Rain's cooling corpse I was forced to leave behind down there. No, 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 Heather, can't deal with that right now, can't deal with that right now dash, I hissed to myself as I ripped my eyes away from the sight. Evelyn, Preem's voice rung like a soft bell. She dragged me on the first of many, many hobbling steps. Yes, yes. After Evelyn, of course. We were in no fit state for this pursuit, but we had no other options. Quite the pair we made. Me, all jelly-limbed and sore-stomached, a pounding headache in my temples, blood smeared all down the front of my face from an unattended nosebleed I could not have cared less about. Preem's maid uniform was ruined beyond repair, scorched patches burned away from her exposed pale skin, skirt ripped, tights laddered, blonde hair in singed and curled disarray. At least her supernatural flesh itself seemed mostly untouched beneath, except for a few scratches and scrapes and some minor surface burns. I'm glad you're all right too, Preem, I hissed as we staggered onward, along the lip of the crater, toward the tangle of smashed floors and shelves. I am inedible, she sang, softly. Ahaha, I laughed weakly, afraid to drown out the sound of Evelyn's walking stick. We'll need to get you a haircut when we get back. Evie can dash, I swallowed. Evie can buy you a new outfit. Lots of new outfits. Different uniform for every day of the week. More frills. Maybe some gloves. Would you like some gloves? New shoes. Heels. I would like all of that, Preem sing-songed, even softer than before. I was too focused on Evelyn, too scared for Rain, and too out of my head on adrenaline and pain, to pay attention to the fact that Preem was scraped and bruised like a human being, not an illusion of one wrapped around a core of wood animated by abyssal spark. At least we wouldn't have to cut our way through the squid-faced librarians. As soon as the drama below had ended, their attitude of enraptured watching had passed. The show was over. They drifted back to their duties alone or in little groups, no longer shoulder to shoulder in a silently jostling wall, dispersing like gas. Evelyn, oh Evie, what's wrong with you? What are you doing? I hissed to myself, as we turned to set off into the tangled wreckage of the shattered library floor. Far away, her walking stick kept up a steady pace. Bewitched, Preem intoned. Yes, obviously. I scrubbed at the blood drying around my lips. Damn you, Sevens. We had an agreement. When I find you, I dash. A smooth talk from behind us interrupted my smoldering outrage before it could take flame. Saldy's gray block sphere machine rolled to catch up with us. Preem halted and half-turned, as if expecting treachery. I sort of did too, but I hadn't learnt my lesson about Saldy's yet. Evelyn's paranoia was rubbing off on me. The sphere machine blossomed open on the front even as it drew to a halt, blocks rolling back like the leaves of some disgusting fleshy egg. From inside, Saldy's blazed at us with a pinched frown of irritation, rising from her pilot's seat and opening her mouth. Go away, Preem told her. We don't have time for you, Saldy's, I croaked, already dipping a mental hand toward the necessary hyperdimensional equations to just plain get rid of her. I will stop you without dash. Sevens. She leaned bodily out the open front of her machine and waved a fluttering hand at the wreckage in the amphitheater below, enunciating her words as if this was a gurning competition. 7 shades of sunlight, did that? Oh, pet, I do not think so. Hesitation because our friend is dash. Do you seriously think I would allow myself to sleep through a pretender's performance? She shrieked onward, vastly offended as only a true aesthete can be. In trouble, wait, what? I blinked at her furrowed brow, her folded arms, her dismissive huff. Evelyn. Now, Preem intoned, tugging on my arm to pull me onward, back into the tangle of fallen floor and smashed shelf. It was a play, I saw it, I stammered at Saldy's, even as my feet tripped and dragged alongside Preem. I saw the logic, in everything, every movement. In dash. Lady Morel, Saldy said with long-suffering, performative patience of which she did not actually possess a single iota. You are seeing patterns where there are none. Too much time joined backstage with 7 shades of sunlight and not enough paying attention to her work. Saldes punctuated her words with little chops of one perfectly manicured hand against the opposite palm. And besides, who would put on a play for these deaf and blind things? She gestured dismissively at some of the squid-faced librarians, shuffling off between the distant library stacks. What's to teach them? What truths do they need? A new alphabetical sorting system? But they were the audience, they dash. They were a work gang. Watching a problem solve itself. But Evie, she'd have no reason to dash. Evelyn, Preem intoned louder, and I staggered to follow, to dive headfirst into the maze of the library, trying to take in Saldes at the same time. Saldes did a passable impression of a small spoiled girl being asked a question by the most tiresome of school friends, a great huff, a roll of the eyes to blow out the front of her own skull, and a vast flop back into her seat. "Did you see any yellow, Lady Morel?" she asked. The faintest hint. A whisper. A single highlight. I blinked at her. In all that fight, all that confrontation, even the moment of terror when Evelyn had been led away which, now I thought on it, had involved only the librarians and an unseen figure I had not seen a scrap, a speck, a shimmer of that color. No yellow. No. Saldes smiled with brittle pleasure. Well then. There you are, Poppet. I don't understand, then why she's walking off. What difference does it make? We have to get her back before. Saldes did this infuriatingly delicate little shrug with both hands, lips pressed together, a "you should have asked me first" look. Follow us then, I snapped at her, coughed some blood up into my mouth, and swallowed it again, iron and bitter. We can't let her get too far. Follow us, or sit there and be useless. Oh, certainly, Poppets. Certainly. Saldes huffed and rolled her eyes, but she did follow as Preem and I staggered on, after the sound of Evelyn's walking stick. We plunged into the tangle of the collapsed wreckage once more, Preem acting as my support, my crutch, while Saldes' machine clicked along behind us. Her exasperation and outrage had seemed too real for an act. Despite her love of the Yellow Pretender's art, she herself was no player, but an unknown mage at my back made my shoulder blades itch. We had little choice. She knew the library of Carcosa far more intimately than we did, and if one hint from her mocking lips could ensure we break whatever spell had taken Evelyn, it was worth the risk. Preem's stride grew strong as she regained her coordination, but I was stumbling just to keep up, my head throbbing with the echo of brain math exertion, blood still in my nose. Somewhere ahead in the maze of twisty passageways through the towering mess, Evelyn's walking stick called to us, but we couldn't be certain exactly which pathway she and her group of squid-faced guides had taken. Preem had scavenged a few handfuls of cloth-tied nuts from the split carrier bag, stuffed as many as she could into the surviving pockets of her maid outfit, and now tossed them ahead of us as we went, but we didn't slow down to watch and wait as each nut flew and rolled. I don't understand, I panted back over my shoulder as we finally sighted the end of the wreckage, the slight climb back up to the more orderly library floor of marching bookshelves and stacked volumes. Understand what, Poppet? The universe? Saldes tutade. The secrets of creation? I don't put much stock in giant cows and infinite salt licks, I'm afraid. Preem hauled me up onto the floorboards, where our feet met firmer ground. Here her own tread made a distressing mistimed shuffle click, between her one remaining smart black shoe and her bare foot shod only in ruined tights. We hurried on, past the end of the bookcase corridor where we'd found Lilbun's nasty letter, and out into a row of many stacks leading off into the library floor. We'd been here before, not an hour ago, but I could barely remember the way. All around us, squid-faced librarians seemed to be shuffling in the same direction, as if also following the clack of Evelyn's walking stick. Preem, I said, struggling to keep my voice from quivering. I see, she intoned, and we didn't need to share that we felt the same fear, the same lack of comprehension at what was going on here. She dragged me onward, deeper into the stacks, picking up the pace in hopes of catching up with a much larger group of librarians than we were prepared to deal with. We had to walk very close past several of the strange creatures and their shuffling gait, but they paid us no heed. If it came to violence, I told myself I would not hesitate to hurt as many of them as necessary to get them away from Evelyn. "Evie!" I called out, but the heavy silence of the library seemed to swallow my cry. I glanced back to see Saldes lounging in her pilot seat/love sofa, following close. If Seven Shades didn't tamper with Evelyn's mind, I said to her as I clung to Preem's shoulder. If she didn't set up that performance with Stack and Edward's men, what was going on? What was that? "Well," Saldes drawled. "You can't go setting off Greek fire, or whatever that awful racket was, in here, around the books, and expect the catalog not to take notice." She gestured at the nearest librarian. "I did say you'd lose a finger if you opened up one of these horrible bags of guts." A cold realization crept over me. What would happen, if you punctured one of them from a distance, with a fast-moving object? Saldes gave me a look of most disdainful disbelief. "I do know what an arrow is, little Englisher. I'm not some wood-poor scraling who makes do with whale bones. Please, Saldes, just answer the question." I screwed up my eyes, desperately trying to clear my head. She scoffed. "I wouldn't know, I've never been stupid enough to try. Perhaps they summoned help, perhaps they herded another library visitor over, or perhaps the smell of their guts attracted a shark. I'm smart enough to keep my head down when there's an eater going at dash." She paused, blinked, and sighed with a sharp tut. "Eater, is that really the best your English can do here? No word for the genus, eh? Madari?" She pulled a sour face. Well, even the northern tongue fails occasionally, I suppose. Nobody's perfect." "You mean the black lightning creature? Is that what it looked like to you?" Saldes considered me with studied disinterest. I wasn't using this at the time. She waved a hand vaguely at her own face, and with a shudder I realized she meant human senses, eyes and ears. "They must have shot one," I murmured in horror. Preem, we can't hurt these things, not that badly, not if they dash." "Evelyn," was her only reply, as she dragged me onward. "You could have warned us earlier," I said to Saldes. "Instead of hiding in your silly ball thing. Thanks for the complete lack of help. Not all of us are suicidally brave with our immortal souls, Lady Morel. I would commend your frank insanity as bravery, but, actually no, nobody who wishes to see sunrise or smell grass or taste salt ever again would willingly expose themselves to an eater. No pillared hall if you go that way, ugh." She sniffed. "I don't understand how you little Englishers are even scurrying about afterward. Besides, the thing was of no interest to me. None of the pretenders would cast such a boor in any production." "Exit," Preem sing-songed, pursued by a bear. Saldes laughed and slapped her thigh. I boggled at Preem's face in profile as she stared straight ahead, looking for any hint or sign of Evelyn's new entourage as the bookcases unfolded ahead of us. "Preem. When did you read The Winter's Tale?" "All I do is read," she sang softly. "Are you all right?" I whispered. "No." "Okay, silly question," I sighed. "Stupid question, yes. I know, we need to get to Evie. We will. I won't let any harm come to her. If the worst comes to the worst, I can dash. I could push brain math past the limit, taste the abyss once more, define Evelyn and drag all of us back to reality along with this entire half-mile stretch of library and everything in it, books and Saldes and all, at the cost of another swim in the limitless dark. Drop this entire section of library in a field on the edge of Sharrowford. Perhaps the fear was too much, because a hysterical giggle escaped my lips. Preem twisted her head to stare at me. I am sorry, I caught myself, swallowed hard. This is all my fault, Preem. I'm so sorry. It was all my fault, but now was not the time for guilt, I crushed it down, bottled it up for later. Preem said nothing. Milk-white eyes stared back into mine. I know you care deeply for her, I know you're capable of that, I whispered to Preem very softly. This wasn't for Saldies to hear. I like to think she knows that too. I'm sure she would. Hopeful lies. Preem turned back to our path, and concentrated on the sound of Evelyn's walking stick. I twisted to look back over my shoulder again. Behind and around Saldi's sphere, dozens of squid-faced librarians were converging on our pathway, shuffling grey robes dragging against the bookshelves, blind tentacles feeling forward from eyeless faces. All around us in parallel stacks, I heard the dry rustle of grey-fleshed feet beneath the library silence. All right, I said to Saldies. Explain. If Evelyn's not part of a play, what's happening to her? Saldies blinked at me, once, twice, in actual open-mouthed shock, looking like I was a child who'd spilt her own guts from her slit-open belly, with no idea what was happening as hot bloody snakes wriggled through her fingers. Oh. Oh, Poppet, oh no. Don't tell me you've all been wandering around out here without proper protection. I assumed you knew. That your construct here was part of it, she gestured at Preem. Or something. Anything. Knew what? Saldies, just tell me what's happening, now, before we reach Dash. She's being inducted into the library catalog. What? What does that mean? What are they doing to her? Turning her into one of them. My heart skipped a beat. Preem, hurry Dash. Yes, Preem intoned. Where are they taking her? I snapped back at Saldies. What exactly are they doing? How long do we have to Dash? Taking her to a junction box, I assume. Saldies paused, smacked her lips, and frowned. Oh no, that's not the right word, not at all, no. TCH. Your absurd sheep farmer peasant tongue doesn't have anything at all for this. Synapse. Bone marrow. Liver. Middle manager. She grimaced at that last one. No. You won't call it any of those things if you clap eyes on it, of that I am certain. Saldies, I hissed, taking my panic out on her navel-gazing. We emerged from the end of a sweeping curve of bookshelves, having followed the clonk of Evelyn's walking stick through the strange, lowering silence of the library, and found ourselves suddenly exposed to the vast open space of the library canyon. We'd walked all the way to the front of this library floor. Massive ornate wooden banisters gave way to the spiderwebbing of rickety walkways that climbed the canyon wall, reaching twig-like fingers across the mile-wide gap to the far side. A wave of vertigo washed over me at the infinite floors in the distance, a mirror of the ones on this side, receding into the upper darkness, but Preem's iron strength kept my knees from wobbling. For a horrible moment I thought the librarian entourage had led Evelyn out onto those creaking, crumbling walkways, and seriously began to contemplate the math to just rip this entire half-mile of library back to our reality. But then I saw the librarians, maybe 200 feet ahead of us, making for the stairs down. Hundreds of squid-faced librarians shuffled away from us, packed shoulder to shoulder, clogging the edge of the library floor like grey cholesterol clotting a vein. If Evelyn was in the center of that scrum, she was too short for us to spot. Evie! I called, heard no response. Preem, right there Dash. Preem dragged me forward, all but marching now. Preem, don't hurt them, you heard what Saldies said and we can't deal with Dash. My point is, Lady Morel, Saldies drawled from behind me, her machine ticking along the floorboards to keep up. Your friend has decided she wants to stay with the library, rather than face reality. What? I twisted back to look at her. That's well, actually, considering Evelyn that's not completely absurd, but it is also mad. Saldies smiled and a hint of real, genuine sorrow touched her dark eyes, her full red lips, the crease of a noble brow. Have you never loved a library, Lady Morel? Well, yes, but... have you never abhorred the world beyond books? Wish to stay within that candlelight halo forever, no matter the strain on your eyes? All it takes is a little self-honesty, in one's heart of hearts, and the library knows you. A sound slithered across the blanket of silence, not sudden but slow, slick and sodden and sinewy, louder than the shuffle of grey librarian feet or the clack of Evelyn's walking stick, and undeniably biological. It did not cut the silence, but seemed like part of the quiet had come alive. Like a huge wet snake emerging from a sewer pipe. I looked for source of the sound, and Preem stumbled to a halt for a single step. She must have sighted the thing a second before I did, but by the time my eyes had widened and the breath gone still in my throat, Preem was dragging me onward again with renewed purpose, toward the wall of grey librarian backs. Down on the floor of the library canyon, far far away, a tower of meat was approaching. 1/3 biology textbook drawing of a virus, 1/3 flesh-stripped nervous system of a flightless bird, and 1/3 giraffe. The thing was a giant pillar of dark red leathery meat mounted atop a collection of far too many crab-like legs, which moved with a disturbingly artificial motion, like a child trying to make their fingers walk as the legs of a spider. At the tip of the meat tower the thing possessed a potato-shaped head the size of a lorry, with a dull grey beak, and a circular band of sickly green light hovering in the air above. Orifices yawned in the back of the thing's head. Several long fine tentacles like the feelers of a jellyfish emerged from those dark holes, and a single massive tentacle waved lazily upward in the air, a blunt-ended tube the thickness of a water slide, with a sucking, puckered hole in the middle, easily large enough to swallow a human being. The sound I'd heard was the emergence of that tentacle. The thing was so big I could see details clearly from all the way up here. Its head reached the 4th or 5th of the library floors, the tentacle much further all the way up to us, as it navigated over the piles of books and weaved its way through the cobwebs of rickety walkways without so much as brushing against them. A cloacal stench reached my nostrils and made my eyes water. Mucus and urine and digestive fluids. I almost laughed, panic and hysteria too much. Why does it have a halo? Ignore it, Preem intoned. The library canyon suddenly seemed less like the main passageway of a wood-paneled infinite building, and more akin to a cell-wall capillary byway in a creature larger than all reality. And here came a macrophage. Ahead, the wall of librarians was shuffling to a slow stop, as the meat-trunk thing began to draw level with us. "Ah yes," Saldes said, a quiver in her voice. "There's the middle manager, come to remake your friend's flesh." "What?" I boggled back at Saldes, and found her leaning out of the front of her machine, peering down at the bizarre half-bird half-dried jerky monster. "Well, where do you think the catalog comes from?" She winced. "Or the books. This is not a safe place to be a magician." Saldes shook her head and frowned, quite upset. "Not at all. Mages are vulnerable here. The more books they've read the worse it is. And they always assume they are untouchable, that their work is more important than mere self-definition. At least I admit I'm a fruitcake full of emotional sinkholes, that's why I stay in my shell." She slapped the inside of her grey block sphere machine. "That's the price for staying here and staying me, I live as a snail does." What is it going to dash?" "The books your little Englisher magician knows are about to be rotated out of her mind," Saldes explained. "The liver will pass them back to this rabble, to be added to the library, and then she herself will be, Saldes cleared her throat. "Reborn. You'll want to be interrupting this initiation before she's swallowed, yes? Not after. Bit late then. But if I were you I wouldn't dash." I never got to hear what Saldes wouldn't do, if her dearest friend was about to be eaten and processed into a grey-faced slave drone, because Preem decided to do her best impression of a professional rugby player. She tucked me to one side as if to shelter me from driving rain, pointed her opposite shoulder at the wall of grey-clad backs, and charged. The librarians went over like cricket stumps hit with a cannonball, flailing and falling and flapping and fumbling, toppling their fellows with clawing hands, bouncing off the banister at the edge of the floor and scrabbling grey fingers against the bookcases opposite. I had to swallow a scream, half at the sudden, crawling proximity of the masses of writhing grey flesh, my phantom limbs lashing out in a protective but useless corona, as I was dragged along by sheer momentum, clinging to Preem for fear of stumbling and falling, and half at the terrifying prospect of Preem somehow puncturing one of them deep enough, spilling enough blood, enough guts, to attract the attention of anything lurking nearby. Another thing like the black lightning outsider. Preem slammed through the librarians and they scattered before her, hundreds of them streaming away between bookshelves or onto the rickety walkways, parting like sand, then like water, flowing back from the red-hot iron of our sudden intrusion. "Evie!" I called out, and then we were upon her. Small hunched shoulders over the crooked spine beneath her coat, great mass of blonde hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, her pockets overflowing with notebooks and tools, and her bone wand jutting out from beneath the layers, her soft cream jumper with the off-color thread where she'd repaired the collar herself. Leaning on her walking stick. Prosthetic black visible just beneath the hem of her long skirt. I had this bizarre moment where I expected her to have been stripped naked, like an offering in some silly old horror movie, but it was just Evelyn. Magic did not work like that. Outside did not follow our badly arranged cultural expectations. She could die fully clothed and standing upright just as easily. The grey librarians flowed away from her like water sucked back by an incoming tidal wave or by capillary action, their hands leaving her shoulders and arms and waist. She was side on to us. Eyes unfocused. Preem pretty much just dropped me. I let out a yelp, but adrenaline and fear and love kept me on my feet, kept me staggering the last few paces to my stranded friend. Preem went for the librarian still in proximity, circling Evelyn once, quick and sharp, chasing the creatures back with silent glares and the twirl of her torn skirt and the click of one shoe and a couple of well-placed piston-fast punches to gut or spined head. I'd once seen a video of a service dog, a great muscled German shepherd trained to protect a small girl, by putting itself between her and a simulated attacker, turning always to keep its vulnerable charge in the shelter of its own body. In that moment, Preem reminded me of that dog, driven by something deeper than mere conditioning. But one part of the library catalog did not respond to Preem's threat. The towering remaker creature far below had drawn level with Evelyn, and the massive tentacle it had extended upward now bobbed and arced like an elephant's trunk, sniffing for a scent. "Evie!" I almost fell onto Evelyn, grabbed her about the shoulders, and promised myself I'd never let go again. "Evie, Evie, what are you dash?" Evelyn wore the expression of a sleepwalker, or the victim of mild stroke. Slack lips, heavy-lidded unfocused eyes, staring ahead at nothing. She made eye contact with me and blinked once in slow acknowledgement. "Oh," I breathed, heart thudding. "Oh, we have to get you out of here, Evie. Right now." "Preem." I pulled Evelyn into a hug and held on tight. She didn't resist, limp in my grip. "Preem, grab me, now, and hold on. We have get Evie dash." Preem obeyed with a quick hop and trot, wrapping her arms around me from behind before I finished speaking. "Okay," I breathed a shuddering breath, dredging up the familiar equation that would collapse the world, instinctively clenching up in anticipation of the oncoming pain. "And don't let go, and dash." "I wouldn't do your plain stepping trick if I were you, Lady Morel," Saldy's voice cut across my panic, high and sharp. Her grey sphere machine had rolled into the gap left by the scattered librarians, who were already drifting back in twos and threes, the parted sea returning in ebbs and dribbles, all their blind spine and tendril faces turned toward us, toward Evelyn. Saldy's was leaning out of the front of her machine, eyes flashing danger, as close to panic as I think she was capable of feeling. "Not on her, not now," she continued. "If you lead your friend back across the ice wall firmament, it will be her body only. Her mind is entangled with the catalog." Saldy's gaze flickered up and to the right, behind me, out into the open space of the library canyon, where the trunk tentacle was wavering closer. "How do I undo that?" I asked. "How? What do we do?" "I haven't the foggiest, my dear girl," Saldy said with a tight smile. All I know is that your friend does not want to leave. Evie. I pulled away from the tight hug, Preem pressed to my back, and took in Evelyn's sleep-hazed face. She blinked, once. That is all I know, Poppet, I cannot help you further, Saldy said, and collapsed back into the waiting seat of her machine, as the grey blocks began to fold shut around her, sealing up her shell. At the last moment, she pulled a pained smile. Wisdom of the gods go with you. Good luck. The grey surface of Saldy's machine swallowed the dark oval of her face, her grimace the last thing to vanish inside the protective sphere. It began to roll slowly backward, away from the tentacle, away from us, before the press of returning librarians became too much through which to force a path. Oh dear, I said, and hiccuped, loudly. Talk to her, Preem intoned, right in my ear, as she peeled herself off me and turned to face the giant tentacle. The feeler was almost at the banister now, the puckered opening turned downward as if ready to pinch a morsel off a plate. My phantom limbs itched to fight or flee, setting up an awful deep tissue ache in my flanks. Preem, you can't fight that, you're not Dash. Talk, Preem repeated, and I heard a tremor, as if the bell of her voice had been struck at an angle. I turned back to Evelyn, tried to peer into her eyes, make her see me. Evie. Evie, you don't want to stay here. Why? What happened? Evie. My mouth was going dry, couldn't keep my voice steady. You've always been obsessed with magic, I know, and with the books, with everything your mother did, but I thought I had you. We're friends, and I love you, and that matters. It doesn't matter, this nonsense here, this crap with Edward Lilburn, all this mage stuff doesn't matter one whit compared to the people who love you. Evie. You do have a family to go back to, people who care about you. Me, Rain, Preem right here, Lozzie too. Maybe not Jeng, okay, fair enough. And Kimberly, yes, you've done a good thing for Kim, you've done good, you're wanted. Evie. Evelyn watched me like she was riding an opiate high. Blank. I was babbling now, in panic, struggling not to give in to the urge to turn and hiss and raise all my phantom tentacles as the vast feeler approached us. Abyssal instinct screamed at me to turn and fight, to spit poison and make myself toxic to this thing that wanted to eat me, but I was not the target of its hunger, and I could not make Evelyn safe, and at a deeper level than pure instinct I knew that no empty threat would halt the Seeker's purpose. This was no predator of the deep, no tiger to posture and stalk, it was more akin to cellular machinery. If we wanted to stop it, we would have to dismantle the thing entirely, until no part was linked to any other. And Twill, I added at last, to Evelyn. You have Twill. Don't you? A fluttering blink passed over Evelyn's eyes. Her lips moved, and she murmured a sound which might have been couldn't, or perhaps hould, or maybe a word I refused to repeat. And that was all. Oh, this is ridiculous. I hiccuped again. When we get home, I'm never letting you live this one down, Evie. Evelyn. Oh, this is like me and the abyss, I muttered. Preem, we need more time, we need to get Evie away from ya. I'm not ashamed to admit, I yelped. The squid-faced librarians had been trickling and shuffling back, the ring of their robes and empty faces tightening around us, but now several of them all reached for Evelyn at once with pale grey soft hands, like dead fish. I didn't get the sense they were trying to wrestle her away from me, they seemed like lepers desperate to touch a queen, that her grace might heal them. But still I yelped and then followed instinct and let out a long, high-pitched hisses. They scattered back from me like startled animals, but did not draw off very far. My heart was pounding in my chest, my spinning head flushed with adrenaline, my back soaked with cold sweat. They crept toward us again. I hiccuped in panic. Preem. I yelled. The huge trunk-like tentacle was almost upon her. Preem, standing ramrod straight with her hands clasped. What was she planning to do, swat the thing like the paw of an overcurious cat? Preem, you can't scare that thing off. Keep the librarians away from Evie. Let me, I can dash. I can do what? Brain math the thing into oblivion? Not only was it bigger than a whale, its main body was hundreds of feet below us. The kind of brain math to solve this problem would also likely lay me out unconscious, and then who was going to get us home? What if another of these things lumbered up to take the place of this one, even if I could burn it to a crisp with atomic fire summoned at the speed of thought? But it was the only choice. The librarians had regathered too thick to shift now, no room for a running start to plow through them. If they decided to hold us in place, we'd be done for. Preem, I have to use brain math, my voice shook. Take Evelyn. Preem finally did as I asked, stepped back as I stepped forward, toward that searching trunk like the feeding tube of a giant alien insect. It was very close now, bumping against the banister only 2 feet away from me. The puckered orifice shuddered, and that cloacal stink washed over us again, like an open sewer. I stuck both hands into the sump of my soul. Perhaps if I redefined the air around the trunk, set it alight, crushed it, froze it, perhaps if I held on very hard I wouldn't pass out and... You are a better mother than yours ever was, Preem sang behind me. I glanced back in surprise to see her staring right into Evelyn's eyes, gently holding her mistress by the forearms. Do not orphan me, Preem added. And Evelyn winced like we'd burst into her bedroom in the middle of the night with a high-powered spotlight and a foghorn. She drew in a pained breath and grunted like she had a mouth full of sand and a throat covered in fur. She sounded, in that instant, very hungover. No, I'm not, she grumbled. Oh, Evie, I breathed in relief. The questing tentacle trunk thing had paused, lost the scent. The squid-faced librarians had lost focus too, milling about aimlessly. Evelyn clung to the front of the doll demon's ruined-made outfit with white-knuckle pressure, as if she was afraid that gravity might fail her and she'd go spinning upward into the void. Yes you are, Preem argued back, bell clear. I make a terrible mother, Evelyn grumbled, almost right into the pillow of Preem's chest, shaking all over with soft tears flowing from the corners of her eyes. Terrible everything. Failure. Worse than she was. Incompetent. Swiped it right from under my nose. And then everyone's in danger because of me, and what do I have to go back to? Nothing works. There's no life there, nothing normal. Everything I was meant to be is a ruin. I love you, Preem told her. Evelyn grimaced, as if this was the worst barb of all. Evie, I whispered, tiptoeing away from the shivering, shuddering trunk tentacle thing. Evelyn glanced up and around, furiously scrubbing her eyes on her sleeve. She turned green and pale and swallowed a scream at the sight of the thing that hung behind me, and the hundreds upon hundreds of squid-faced librarians all around us, and pressed herself closer to Preem as if trying to hide in her embrace. It's okay, I whispered, trying not to think about rain, stepping close to join the hug and get us all out of here. I understand. You wanted to stay here, in a moment of weakness. It's okay, this place gets into your head. But it's okay. Just because Edward pulled one over on us doesn't matter, it doesn't make you worthless, never, never dash. What? For a moment my brain didn't process the word correctly. Then, I decided we were most definitely not in the right place for this conversation. Evelyn opened her eyes and pulled a smile of such desolate self-mockery, bitter tears running down her cheeks. Oh, Evie. Oh, it's okay, Evie. It's going to be okay. I wrapped my arms around her and Preem, and began the equation. It'll be okay, we'll make it okay. Back home, I whispered, my head against Evelyn's. Not here, never again. Hold on tight now, don't let go. Reality folded up. Our tripartite hug collapsed in body though not in spirit when home blossomed around us. The magical workshop, full of familiar clutter, rain drumming on the roof, the distant creak of the pipe struggling to heat the iron radiators. A wet Saturday afternoon, in grim old Sharrowford, had rarely felt so welcome. I fell over and vomited on the floor. Very dignified. Deep in the conspiracy between nervous system and subconscious, I had planned to leap into action. To whirl away from Evelyn and Preem, to call out for Rain, to locate where Zheng had stashed Amy's stack, to check on Lozzie, to see if Twill had arrived, to make sure we weren't currently under siege by Edward Lilburn in this moment of weakness. To know everyone I loved was alive and in one piece or on their way to the hospital, or on their way here, or just plain here. Wasn't quite sure. All I knew was Rain was hurt, and somebody needed to take charge. But I'd bruised my grey matter with brain math twice in under half an hour. I'd spent the time between those uses pumped to the gills with adrenaline, and then torn through the membrane between outside and home, the mental equivalent of using my forehead as a battering ram. Staggering to the kitchen and dunking my head in the sink would have been a challenge. Rallying the troops was akin to a moon landing in a hot air balloon. If I'd clung hard to Evelyn and Preem, I probably could have sunk to my knees and rolled onto my back, but no, I took a single wobbling step away, burped out a syllable that didn't sound remotely like the beginning of Rain's name, and found myself on a trip to make intimate acquaintance with the ground. Brought up a mouthful or two of bile, then lay there, cheek on the floorboards. I blacked out briefly, or merely slipped off into a nap which achieved the opposite of rest. At some point a pair of strong capable hands rolled me into the recovery position. I mumbled a noise which was meant to be, "Thank you, Preem." Consciousness slowly filled back in, eventually my lizard brain and abyssal instinct surrendered the controls back to my frontal lobe, which made me wince and groan and try to sit up. "Lie still," Preem said, musical and calm. "No," I croaked. "No, thank you." Getting my own backside underneath me was an interesting challenge. My phantom limbs didn't even try to help. My body knew on every possible level, abyssal or ape or amalgam or otherwise, that this was the time to lie very, very still, not leap up and shout and look for more problems. But I got there, legs splayed out in front of me, head hanging, eyelids like lead, because I needed to know where Rain was. She and Preem were sitting on the floor too. My ground buddies. Floor friends. Floorboard family. Ah, and there was the delirium. Lovely. Evelyn had collapsed too, perhaps from the stress of cross-membrane journey, perhaps the aftermath of attempted librarianification, or perhaps just emotional overload. She sat in a shivering heap of coat and overspilling notebooks and dry tears. Her eyes were very red, and her prosthetic leg stuck out at an uncomfortable angle. Preem knelt in front of her, somehow prim and proper and resplendently dignified in the rags of her ruined uniform, watching Evelyn's face. We three mice had scurried back through a bolt hole in the walls of reality, back to hallways and rooms built for human sizes and human purposes, filled with human objects and human smells. We had escaped the vast spaces beyond, designed for giants and hive minds and ancient oversexed magicians who were confined to living inside hamster balls. Evelyn and I looked at each other for a long moment, both exhausted. Little mice, panting and shaking and alive. "I am an incredible mess," she said eventually. "Me too," I croaked. Evelyn nodded weakly. Then, by slow degrees, as if she couldn't bear to do it all in one go, like bandages teased away from puckered flesh, prolonging the pain, dislodging blood clots, wound flowing fresh and clean, she looked to Preem. First at the floor, then at Preem's small hands on Preem's neat knees, then up, to meet those milk-white eyes. "I am not, I can't be your dash," she tried to say. The doll demon leaned forward and gently, slowly, with careful fingertips seeking silent consent, eased Evelyn into a hug. Something old and brittle and knotted, like scar tissue, came apart inside Evelyn's face. Her eyes fluttered shut. I had to get up. I had to get up and call for Rain. And locate Zheng and Lozzie and find Twill. And without raising my head I could see droplets of crimson smeared on the floor of the magical workshop. That was Rain, had come from Rain, her blood from her veins, and the house was so quiet, too quiet, not even Tenny bumping around upstairs, and I blinked at a single scarlet smear boot print just by the half-open door through to the kitchen and And I lurched to my feet. Scrabbled for a chair, almost knocked it over, clung on like a shipwrecked sailor. Head swimming, vision pulsing black at the edges, I stared at that bloody boot print. My fault. Rain. I called, shouted, croaked, throat cracked and broken. Rain dash, then coughed twice, spewing blood into my own hand. My nose was bleeding again. If she's got any sense, Evelyn said, she'll have gotten herself to the hospital. Rain rarely has sense. True. Are you alright? I croaked. Hollowed out, red-rimmed, raw as she was, Evelyn mustered a tiny frown at my stupid question. Okay, yes, you're going to be fine, I said. My shout finally summoned attention. Deep in the house, a door clicked open, creaking on rarely used hinges. Swift feet skidded over floorboards, slammed into the kitchen and knocked over a chair with a clatter on the flagstones. I held my breath and gathered what mental strength I had left, tried to dredge up the right equation to flatten whatever came through that door, or at least pretend I could flatten it, to bluff and stall until Twill arrived. If Twill was arriving. If Lozzie had contacted her at all. Twill arrived. An awful lot of Twill arrived. Teeth bared, panting hard, wild eyes and half-wolf body, Twill yanked the workshop door open, ready to fight monsters. If I'd been a fraction less exhausted, I might have flinched. Oh good, there you are, I wheezed. Apt word, I managed. Don't, Evelyn said to me, a tremor of new panic in her voice. I wouldn't dare, I said. That's between you two. But we're going to talk about it, later. Everything is going to be okay. What? What's this? Twill blinked between the two of us, stepping into the room and dropping her wolf mist form with a shiver of her shoulders and a shake of her snout. Her face came back up as angelically pretty, framed by her mass of dark curls, but pale and worried like she'd been crouched in a foxhole under fire for hours. She went for Evelyn without hesitation, took one of Evie's shoulders and squeezed, though she didn't try to join the hug on the floor. Evie! The hell were you doing? Why didn't you call me to come with you this time? Evelyn blinked up at her, blank guilt, cornered. You don't have to do it right now, I wheezed. Evie. Twill frowned at her. Everyone said you got hypnotized or some shit. She waved a hand in front of Evelyn's eyes. You okay? Evie. Yeah. Evelyn's face hardened into that same tiny, emotionally exhausted frown she'd given me. She will be perfect, Preem sung, softly. Okay, cool, thank you Preem. I'd never heard Twill sound so utterly done with a situation. She straightened up and met my eyes, and shrugged with long-suffering exasperation. You could let me know about all this too, Heather. Where's Rain? I croaked. Twill lit up, anger forgotten, as if she'd only just realized I would very much want to know this one small matter. Oh, shit, yeah. Hospital. Hospital, I echoed. Cling on tight, Heather. Yeah. Lozzie got in the ambulance with her, took her phone too. So she's not alone, you know. Ambulance peeled out 10 minutes ago. They're fast round here, not like out in the sticks. She pulled a grin. Don't worry, Rain's tough as old nails, right? She was up and moving around, talking clearly, not woozy or anything. Moving around too much actually. You know, how Rain is. I resisted an entirely appropriate urge to scream. Twill, please, I need you to be specific. Twill's grin faltered into the whipped dog grimace she used when trying to put a good face on something bad and dumb. Well, she didn't want to go to the hospital. Said you and Evie needed her. Idiot, Evelyn hissed. She was talking like a machine gun bad metaphor, Twill winced. Tried to bind up her own thigh with an old towel and go back through the gateway after you. I had to sort of, turn it off to stop her. She gestured at the gateway mandala on the back wall, inert again, just blank plaster in the doorway. Some of the paper and masking tape parts had been ripped off, and now lay on the floor. When we finally got her to go, she insisted on walking all the way to the end of the road, so it didn't look like she'd got shot at home. Said she and Lozzie had to get their story straight. She needs me, I said, and almost fell over when I tried to step away from the chair, shipwrecked and slipping into deep water. Twill caught me awkwardly under the arms. Yeah, Heather, but like, you can't walk, yeah. Lauren Lilburn should not be out in the streets without protection, Evelyn grumbled, finally disentangling herself from Preem, who sat back without complaint. Evelyn wiped her eyes on the back of her sleeve, still looking fragile as blown glass. She's not. She's in an ambulance, Twill said. And she's with Rain. Rain will shortly be in an emergency room operating theater, up to her eyeballs in morphine, with a surgeon rooting around inside her leg. Oh. Ah. I feel sick, I murmured. Let the NHS do their job, Evelyn said. Rain is going to be fine. Heather, Rain is going to be fine, I've seen her covered in a lot more blood than that. She let out a little shuddering breath, gave the lie to her own convincing words. But somebody needs to be with Lozzie. Somebody capable of deterring a kidnapping attempt. Twill went wide-eyed. You think they're gonna make a move on us? Evelyn paused, gaze turned inward, her mind chewing on practical problems, perhaps as a way of avoiding emotional ones. She swallowed and sniffed back the remains of her tears. No. No, I don't think so, she said eventually. Edward didn't plan for any of this, doesn't know where Lauren is. He's cautious and careful, and he made a mistake. And he has, in a way, kept his word, Evelyn grimaced. He may be expecting us to strike at him. Maybe. But no good strategic thinker leaves an opportunity ungrasped, unless he thinks it's a trap. And he may have other ways of determining where his niece is. Better safe than sorry. Somebody needs to be with Lauren. Preem intoned. No, you don't leave my side, Evelyn said, a soft crack in her voice. I have to, I need, at least call Lozzie dash, I stammered as Twill propped me up against the edge of the table and stepped back, hands out, like she was balancing a piece of wood. I think she was worried I might vomit on her. Where's Dash? Oh. But, Jing Dash. Yeah, I think Jing gets that we're not supposed to eat her. Twill pulled a face. Kim's at work. Tenny's upstairs, apparently asleep, according to Lozzie. 'S just us. Get me the box of strawberries from the fridge. Evelyn gestured at Twill. And painkillers, the bottle with the red label on the second shelf in the end cupboard. And water. And chocolate, for Heather. Make her eat it. She needs the serotonin, the quicker the better. Then she added, awkward and rushed, please, Twill. Right, yeah, sure. Twill lingered on Evelyn for a moment, then hopped out of the workshop in 2 quick steps. A second later we heard her rummaging around in the kitchen. I gripped the table hard, trying to take deep breaths, my knees shaking and head pounding. Where was my mobile phone? Where I'd left it before the trip to Carcosa, on the kitchen table. No point taking it out there beyond reality. I reached for the chair, planning to use it as a large and unwieldy crutch. Heather, please do not fall flat on your face and break your nose, Evelyn said. The last thing we need right now is more injuries. My girlfriend has been shot, I croaked at her. Twill is bringing you chocolate, and water, and painkillers, and she is going to escort you to the hospital when you can walk, so she can watch Lozzie, and if you go in there with a face covered in blood there are going to be questions, and there are going to be questions anyway, and you need to get your head in order for that and do not make me do this right now, her voice shook into a panicked crescendo. Rain has been shot, yes. I can't argue, just do as I say. I blinked hard, several times. You don't have to be in charge, Evie. Not to make light of it, but 10 minutes ago you were trying to feed yourself to a giant tentacle. You're allowed to decompress a bit. I don't need to decompress. I need to sleep for a week, and... Evie, you can't let Twill take me to the hospital, you need her here, somebody here. Maybe it's silly, but I'm worried you might try to go back. I don't know how far that effect extended into your mind. Everything is different now, she told me, voice quivering, and glanced at Preem. She will not be alone, Preem sang. I had nothing to say to that. Standing in the room when they made eye contact with each other felt like I was an intruder on a private moment. Well, a private moment that had played out in front of hundreds of squid-faced librarians on the other side of the walls of reality. Twill returned with all of Evelyn's requests, and I did as I was instructed. I sipped water to soothe my raw throat, wiped blood off my face, chewed chocolate with numb lips, until I could finally taste the cocoa and sugar and milk. My senses woke back up and I felt a little more like a living being, instead of a conduit for heavenly mathematics and adrenaline. Evelyn confirmed that the 2 books we had liberated from Carcosa were safely stowed away. Lozzie had left them on the workshop table, dumped in panic, and she added Edward Lilburn's nasty letter to the haul. My aches and pains and headache stabs slowly stopped being a blanket and became more specific, made worse by the peaks and valleys of the soft argument Evelyn and Twill had decided to begin. I'm going to need so much coffee, I murmured. Do as I say, Evelyn was saying to Twill. Somebody needs to go with Heather. I am here, Preem intoned. Yeah, I mean, you are, I guess. Twill frowned at Preem. Do not start a rivalry, I grunted through the headache pain, and passed a duet of blushing and stuttering from other sources. You both love Evelyn in completely different ways. Now either fetch my mobile phone or carry me to it, or I'm going to fall over. When Twill finally helped me out of the workshop and into the kitchen, Evelyn was still sitting on the floor with Preem, feeding her strawberries by hand, one by one, until the whole box was gone, and she had only herself left to give. The kitchen was a much bigger mess than the workshop. As Twill helped me to a chair, I imagined the scene of Rain and the others stumbling in here in panic, bleeding and confused and scared for those they'd left behind. Rain's homemade riot shield lay on the floor, dumped in a heap with her motorcycle jacket and truncheon and handgun, all smeared with drying blood, a dark and violent version of discarded coats and Wellington boots after a walk in the woods. Rain dripped down the kitchen windows, from leaden clouds above. Amy Stack's firearm sat on the kitchen table. Black metal like an alien spacecraft, it dwarfed all mundane clutter, a horrible ugly thing. Reaching for my phone amid the discarded breakfast bowls and debris of pre-expedition prep felt like stealing from a scorpion. Just beyond the door to the utility room, the little-used cellar door stood wide open, a gaping dark mouth, lit by the thin glow of 2 naked bulbs from far below. I'd only ever been down there twice. Zheng's rumbling voice teased the edge of my hearing, like rock shifting beneath the earth. Let her know I'm okay, please. I croaked to Twill. She knows. Knew the moment you turned up, which was weird. But she won't come up here. Twill shrugged. She doesn't trust me to watch Stack alone. As if I'm going to let her get away or some shit. She's not going to hurt. I let that linger. Twill shrugged and looked profoundly uncomfortable. In the 10 minutes I was down there, Stack said nothing that wasn't trying to goad us into losing our temper with her, but it all sucked. I dunno, she doesn't get how to piss somebody off, not for real. I nodded and screwed my eyes up, crammed the headache down. Later. Just later. We need to let Rain know about Evie. And me. Click. Rain dash. Heathy. Lozzie. Breathless and relieved. Is dash. There's so many doctors and nurses and it's going to be okay I think, but I need to keep hiding, but it's going to be okay. They said only 20 minutes, it's not hit anything important, but Rain kept trying to get up and she won't sit still and dash. And you can't think of anybody who would want to shoot a gun at her. Maybe even by accident, the policeman asked me for the 4th time. He was running out of new ways to phrase the same question, with his big droopy mouth set below big droopy eyes like a tired basset hound, poised over a tiny notebook he produced from the pocket of his stereotypical black overcoat. He kept his voice low and casual as he sat across from Twill and I, in the opposite row of uncomfortable sea-green wipe-clean plastic chairs, in the visitors' waiting area next to the accident and emergency department in Sharrowford General Hospital. No. No, nobody at all. I'm sorry, I lied again. He nodded, pulled a face like a pouting dog, and pretended to read his notes. I took a shuddering breath and wrung my clammy palms together. I briefly considered taking Twill's hand, but that would have entailed asking her to unfold her arms, which would spoil the wonderfully unstudied grumpiness she had adopted from the moment the police officer had walked over and introduced himself, Detective Mark Stugan. And I did not need to act frightened and fragile to flatter Detective Stugan's authority. Those emotions were real, they just had nothing to do with him. Twill and I had stepped off the bus 2.5 hours ago, but we still hadn't seen Rain. Or Lozzie, which gave rise to an entirely different order of concern. This visit was nothing like when Rain and I had spoken with Sarika in her hospital bed. Back then, Nicole Webb had waved us through the Byzantine layers of medical bureaucracy, soft and jagged alike. Here, we were stuck in an A-East waiting room so close to the panic and blood and beeping machinery. Night had not yet arrived with the split eyebrows and finger bone fractures and drunken fights of a Saturday evening, though the sky beyond the windows had turned inky dark, held at bay by the too bright fluorescent hospital lighting. But the waiting room was busy anyway, with minor injuries and strange stomach complaints and hollow-eyed, silent children with their worried mothers. We'd had to go up to the desk, ask for Rain, explain who we were, sit around, go to the desk again, sit some more. Time crawled at a second per minute, tedium turned fear into chewed nails. Twill bought crisps and chocolate bars and fizzy drinks from a vending machine, under strict orders from Evelyn to make sure I ate, but my stomach was mounting a very successful insurgency. I'd called Lozzie instead. But where are you? I'd hissed down the phone at her manic giggle of greeting. Lozzie, we're in the waiting room, you need to come join us, it's not safe for you to be alone. I'm with Rain, she'd hissed back. But Rain's in surgery, isn't she? Or recovery or dash. I'm hiding in plain sight because plain sight is the best place not to get asked my name because my name might be on lists and lists are the first thing the pigs will check and they'll talk to Rain but I'll make sure they don't check. Okay. And they'll talk to you too so I can't be there. Lozzie's voice whispered off into fairy dust. As if tugged away on the wind before she hung up. They didn't think to tell us Rain was out of surgery, not until Twill went up to the desk a third time. We waited more. My headache got worse. I wanted to stand up and scream. Or go to sleep. Then Detective Mark Stugan turned up and proved Lozzie right. He'd ambled up to the front desk and exchanged a few words with the nurse on duty. She'd pointed at us, and over he had wandered. A very tall man, gangly like a tree with an exotic fungal disease, dressed in dark suit and long coat and sensible shoes. May as well have been a uniform. He'd wanted to ask us some questions. Routine questions. Very serious questions. Small questions. A random drive-by shooting like this, with no motive. The police wanted to trace the firearm, get it off the streets, catch the criminal. Very important. Very serious. We understand, yes. Not under arrest, of course not. We understand. We'd done nothing wrong. Rain had done nothing wrong. But we might know something that would help. He'd folded himself into the chair, too small for his limbs. Somebody presents for treatment with a fresh bullet wound, the hospital quietly lets us know, he told us through his big droopy smile that was not a smile at all. Not that this happens much in Sharrowford, but we get some spillover now and again. You wouldn't believe the number of times somebody takes a bullet on Merseyside or in the Manchester suburbs, and gets driven out here to sleepy Sharrowford because they think they'll avoid notice. I weren't there, Twill had grunted. Just here as moral support for Heather. Sure, girlfriend, you know. Does she go to a lot of parties? He'd asked, about 6 different ways. Not at all, I'd told him. She spends almost all her time with me, or in class. He smiled that hangdog smile again. Don't worry, I'm not narcotics, I'm not gonna take her down to the station for an ounce of weed. But drugs make people crazy for money. If she was buying stuff at a student party and hey, we know it happens, then she might have owed somebody money. He frowned, fatherly in a sleepy sort of way. She could be in trouble. It's better we get to that trouble before something worse happens to her. She definitely doesn't owe anybody money. And she doesn't take drugs. He'd made a little note, in his little book. And who does she hang out with? He said it like an afterthought. Just me. What about Evelyn? He asked, faux casual. Evie. That's the other girl we live with, yes. Evelyn's practically a hermit and she's afraid of loud noises, let alone drugs. Then, because I was tired and frightened and angry and wanted this man to go away, I added, I know where Rain is all the time, officer. She's mine. If she was doing things with bad people, I would know. And I wouldn't let her. The detective didn't even raise an eyebrow at that. He pulled the corner of his mouth up in that droopy knot smile. Everybody keeps secrets, miss, he'd said. Even from their loved ones. Not Rain, I lied. Not from me. He knew I was lying, about knowledge of who'd shot Rain and why. I looked like a wreck, though I'd wiped the blood off my face and fortified my mind with coffee, hastily brewed back home before we'd left for the hospital. Perhaps he could see that my stress and tension was not merely the result of my lover being hospitalized with a serious wound. But the truth would have upended his mind. He was a lot sharper than he looked. Perhaps the look was intentional, but his face lacked the telltale puffiness and broken capillaries of an alcoholic, or the dark eye bags of a depressed divorcee, or the emptiness of a man going through the motions. He treated us with respect, as adults, didn't call us, you girls, phrased his questions carefully and intelligently and found a dozen different angles from which to repeat them, and that made him dangerous. He was not entirely different to Carcosa's squid-faced librarians. A representative of an institutional rather than literal group mind, which could process and destroy us as gruesomely as any nightmare cellular machinery from outside. Frankly, officer, talking to you is at least distracting me from having to think about the fact my girlfriend has been shot in the leg. Twill smothered a snort. Not my intention, but I was too exhausted to care. Well, how's about this for a distraction? He smacked his lips once. Our ballistics guys have told me they can't find the bullet. He let that statement hang in the crowded waiting room air. Twill shifted, probably looked guilty. So? What does that mean? I asked. No need to fake my total lack of understanding. Well. He scratched his chin. When I interviewed Rain, she told me she was shot about where the ambulance picked her up. End of Scotswalk Street. But dash. My heart caught in my chest, on a net of barbed wire. You've spoken to her? Is she dash? Shoo, he raised a finger and lowered his voice. I'm not supposed to divulge patient information, that's for the doctors. But between you and me, she seemed all right. The nurses don't let us talk to patients if they're not in any fit state for it, anyway. I think your girl's gonna be just fine. A sigh of relief shuddered through me, a knot of horror loosening in my chest, but I knew this was a ploy. A way in through my emotions, or to judge the truth of my words. I nodded and thanked him and shared a smile with Twill. But, he said. There's no bullet, despite an exit wound. Should be in the pavement, the dirt, somebody's garden wall. But it's not. Which means maybe your, girlfriend, maybe she walked away after getting shot. Which happens more than you'd think, people often try to keep going. But still, funny, isn't it? If we can't find the bullet, it's that much harder to trace the gun. I don't know what that means, detective. I do know Rain is very tough, and she never quits. She was probably trying to walk home. I also knew the bullet from Stack's gun was embedded in floorboards in the library of Carcosa. Beyond a world away. At least they'd never find it. You're Rain, he said, turning grave. It's not impossible she's trying to protect the person who shot her dash. I almost laughed. Or protect herself from further retaliation, or protect you perhaps. The only person protecting Amy Stack was me. I was the only thing between her and Zheng's teeth. He misunderstood the shake of my head. He shrugged and smiled, and reached inside his coat to pull out a little laminated card. Handed it to me, and I just held it awkwardly. 2 phone numbers were printed on it, beneath the shield and feather crest of the Sharrowford police. If you're worried about Rain, he was saying, if anybody approaches her with threats related to the shooting, or she's making phone calls and hiding them from you, or you remember anything at all, call that number. Goes straight to my desk. He reached forward and tapped the card. If she's involved with dodgy people, if you think somebody might be putting her in danger, don't hesitate to give me a call. In absolute confidence. I'm the only one who puts her in danger, I let slip out loud, a sob threatening deep in my throat. That finally drew a curious twitch of his eyes, because it made 0 sense. What did I look like, to this man? A mousy, skittish, scrawny college girl, a prey creature attached to a slightly older and much more dangerous predator. "'Snot your fault," Twill muttered, and nudged me gently in the side. "Hey, Heather. It's not." "Yeah. Why would it be your fault, miss?" Detective Stuggin asked, a snake creeping through a chink in my inexpert armor. I sniffed away the ugly threat of tears and wiped my eyes on the back of my sleeve. One of Rain's hoodies, black and baggy, 2 sizes too large for me, smelling of her in our bedroom and sleep. Couldn't very well wear the same clothes I'd taken to Carcosa, bloodstained from my own nosebleed. Should have made her stay at home, I managed. Good luck making sense of that, detective. He opened his mouth to lay some tripwire, but my eyes went past his shoulder, pastel pink and pastel blue and a band of white, fluttering through the double doors which led deeper into the warren of the hospital, mixed with the starch of nurse uniforms and the tired-eyed doctors. Lozzie, up on tiptoes to wave her fingers at us across the waiting room. Detective Stuggin began to turn. Twill's eyes went up too. My heart leapt for news of Rain and for Lozzie to hide before the police saw her, but then there was a nurse next to us, standing over us, getting our attention with a sharp clearing of her throat, distracting all 3 pairs of eyes away from the wisp of tricolor pastel that vanished back into the crowd. "Are you Heather Morell?" The nurse was saying to me, wide and middle-aged and very practical, pinch-faced and strict around the mouth. "You and your friend here are here to see Rain dash." She broke off to check the clipboard tucked under one arm. "Haynes." "Yes. Yes, that's me. I'm Heather. Is Rain dash? You can go in to see her now. She's awake and on the mend, and we've moved her out of intensive care." My heart soared and a great breath went out of me. Twill put a hand on my shoulder and the nurse managed a practiced, gray smile. "Room 224, just down the corridor there and into the second left, almost at the end of the row. Just follow the numbers, you can't miss them." Thank you. I looked at the double doors. Lozzie had vanished completely. She's got a private room, since, well. The nurse cleared her throat and glanced at the detective. "But that's all over and done with. Miss Morell, are you going to be taking her home?" Yes, of course I will. What dash? We should be able to discharge her in 3 to 4 hours. We don't expect she'll have to spend the night. But she's a walker, that one." The nurse gave me a purse-lipped look as if Rain's behavior was my fault. "And she'll tear out all her stitches if she tries to walk home. I'll take her home. On the bus. One of the doctors will be in with proper aftercare instructions shortly, but I suspect Miss Haynes is going to need external motivation to keep her off that leg. Do you live at the same address? I'm her partner, I said without missing a beat. She does what I tell her. I'll make her rest. Standing up and gathering myself after hours of waiting set my stomach churning again, made my head throb with renewed tension, headache, my knees weak. My hands were shaking, so I shoved them into the front pocket of the too large hoodie. Call me if you remember anything, Detective Stuggin said, rising with us. Thank you both for your time. Miss Morell, Miss Hopton. He shook our hands, then ambled off toward the front desk again. I was too numb and nervous to think, so Twill steered me toward the double doors with a gentle hand on the small of my back. We plunged into the monastic labyrinth of the hospital corridors, oddly hushed between the pale plastic walls and squeaky floors. Never tell the police anything, Twill grumbled under her breath. You did cool though, Heather. Kept it cool. You sound like Lozzie, I managed a weird little laugh, voice shaking. Where'd she go, anyway? Twill hissed, looking over her shoulder and into every open doorway we passed. Back to Rain, maybe. By the time we reached room 224, at the end of a blue-floored corridor lined with similar doors and reeking of antiseptic cleaner, I was ready to vibrate out of my own skin. Abyssal instinct ached to sprout a dozen tentacles to pull me down the hallways in a headlong rush, screaming at me to rescue my mate, find my other flesh in this place that brought back so many bad memories of other hospitals. On a conscious level I was afraid for Rain's health, but paradoxically also scared to see her, as if contact would catalyze a change I was unprepared for. Rain's pain in Carcosa, that unique pain on her face, more than mere physical. Worse than a bullet in her leg. The door to 224 was closed. I hesitated but Twill didn't notice. She knocked twice and pushed it open. Inside was a cramped hospital room, dominated by one of those overcomplicated adjustable beds with side rails. Clean white walls made it feel like a cell. A little dispenser for hand sanitizer was bolted to the wall beside the door, and a pair of chairs made it feel less sparse. A bundle of Rain's clothes lay on one of the chairs, the possessions she'd been admitted with. Wide windows looked out across a jumble of hospital buildings and car parks, shrouded deep in the oncoming night, dotted with little lights. In the space between one heartbeat and the next, I thought I saw a shimmer in those darkened windows, a reflected glimmer in headache yellow. But then it was gone. A trick of the light. A cluster of drip stands with electronic readouts and bags of saline and other fluids accompanied the machine-like hospital bed, their lines currently stretched out near maximum extension, to Rain. I breathed in relief, an unbidden smile bursting on my face and then freezing. Rain, what are you doing? Rain blinked at us, a rabbit caught in car headlights. She wasn't resting. She wasn't even in bed. She was halfway across the room, thin green hospital gown hitched up over a truly impressive mass of dressing and bandage and gauze, wrapped expertly and neatly around her upper left thigh, otherwise bare-legged and barefoot. We'd caught her in the attempt to wriggle one arm out of the garment, her dirty blood-stained t-shirt in her other hand, ready to pull it on over her head. Her weight was distributed all wrong, leaning on her good leg, half-balanced against the wall. Chestnut brown hair wild and messy, eyes ringed and stress-dark, skin gone grayish. She looked so vulnerable. My heart broke. Then Twill reached her and took the t-shirt off her with a curse, and I was in front of her, trying to touch her arms but afraid to embrace her lest it hurt her somehow. Rain was blinking back and forth, confused and startled, as if she didn't know exactly where she was and she lit up with a huge shit-eating grin, the shutters coming down, the walls going up. You've been shot, you massive pillock, Twill was saying at her. Get in bed and stay there. Rain, are you dash, I was babbling. Well of course you're not okay. Heather. Rain said my name with such exuberance my heart did a little flip, but the grin on her face kept flickering and jerking, like she wasn't sure if I was real. She pulled me into a hug, then quickly thrust me back again, eyes shooting past me to the open door. Where's Evie? Is she, Heather, you dash? She grinned at me again, then paused and swallowed, emotions glitching out. Evie's safe, I said gently. She's at home, I brought her back fine. We called Lozzie, she said she told you this. She did tell you, yes. Rain blinked at me as if struggling to focus, breathing a bit too hard. Her pupils were dilated, too wide. Yeah. She did. She told me that. Right. Yeah. The grin struggled back. You need to lie down or you're gonna fall down, Twill said. She shrugged the backpack she'd been carrying onto the chair with the rest of Rain's possessions. A change of clean clothes, a bottle of water, toiletries because we'd expected an overnight stay. Heather, tell her to lie down. You know she only listens to you. You do need to lie down, Rain. They took my trousers. Rain told me, still trying to grin. Cut them off me and wham bam, gone. Wanted those, not every day you get a gunshot trophy. Twill caught my gaze and tapped her own temple. Yes, I know, she needs to rest, I said. Rain, you need to lie down, they're going to let you go home in a few hours. Can't keep me here, she said through the grin. I'm invincible. I feel great, I am great. I gave her a look, and either my intent or the depth of my exhaustion penetrated her panic mania, or whatever this was, and she obediently took me by the shoulder, righted herself, and glanced at the bed, a little sheepish around her sunken, manic eyes. Wait up, Twill said. Where's Lozzie? Canteen, said Rain. They got lasagna AAA. Twill shook her head and grumbled under her breath. I'll go look for Loz. Heather, just get her to lie down. I'll call a nurse if she won't. Twill, please find Lozzie, I can't deal with two of this. Yeah, I know, said Twill. I'm going. Rain said, hobbling toward the bed, forcing me along with her as support, propping her up. Look at me, going all the goingness thing, yeah, back to bed, bedtime for Rain. Twill rolled her eyes and hurried back out of the hospital room, pulling the door gently shut behind her. I helped Rain limp over to the bed. She listed to one side like a ship in a storm, wincing softly whenever she put weight through her injured thigh muscle. She sat down on the edge, but when I went to help her lie back, she wouldn't go. She gripped my arm and glanced through the wide windows at the darkness outdoors, as if something had caught her attention, then back to me, blinking and swallowing and panting softly. Rain. Yeah, I'm here. The grin flickered back on, then off, interrupted by a heavy blink. Let me get some, just get up and... She tried to rise again but I pressed down on her shoulders, awkward without leverage. Could she still overpower me, injured as she was? Probably. Rain could carry me without breaking a sweat. I'd never seen her so vulnerable, not even when she'd been tied up in the Sharrowford cult's safe house, enduring hours of unknown fate and the screams of the cultists dying downstairs. She wasn't merely worried about me or Evelyn, some essential fulcrum of emotional regulation had slipped. Like she was trying to smile through the verge of a panic attack, or having a manic episode during a crisis, or didn't really believe that Evelyn was safe and just had to escape to go help her old friend. But also none of those things. Those things I could have said something to, reasoned with. She was in shock of a kind that I did not understand, having a hard time coming back, out of her element, hurt, and would not stop. Rain, just sit down, please. She obeyed, breathing slower with concentration, then laughed softly. It's the morphine. I am high as a kite, Heather. Out through the stratosphere, with Venus and Mars. Space Cadet First Class. She sketched me a salute with one hand, brandishing the dosing button on her drip line with the other, pressing it and pretending to shiver as the morphine hit her veins. Maybe it was real. My heart ached for her. That was Rain, that was normal, but not like this. I'll take Space Cadet, over, tears threatened, at memory of Rain's blood. Over dash. Hey, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. Rain hugged me awkwardly around the shoulders, almost slipping off the bed until I pressed her back. She relented with a wink and gestured at the dressing on her bare leg. Doesn't hurt much, not with all the drugs in me. And it's far better than it going in you. She poked me in the shoulder. But you got shot. Rain. I had to blink back the waterworks. Ah, it's nothing. Serious, they told me it was pretty shallow, missed everything important. No, it didn't. It hit you. She already had scars on her thigh. Shallow rakes across the front and side, wounds from our confrontation with Zheng and the cult's awful hound things, in the folded space inside Willow House. Months ago. Another scar, taken for me. A few tears escaped my control as I stared down at her thigh. All my fault. I'd taken her outside, and she was only human. I love you. Rain told me suddenly, voice weak and breaking soft. I love you, Heather. I love you too, Rain. And I'm sorry. She started to lie down sideways, eyelids flickering halfway shut. I shifted the pillow for her. What happened, after you know? Evie. It's really complicated, I said. Which is the understatement of Evelyn's life, I think, and mostly her business. But I got her home in one piece. Rain's eyes drifted shut all the way. I thought I was going to lose, had lost. Both of you. Both of you, she mumbled, voice fading, drug-addled and exhausted. Useless, violence for violence sake only goes so far. No purpose. Run myself out, run myself dead. Can't function without you, not with both of you gone. Couldn't be me. Wouldn't be anything. Pardon. I froze, inside and out, as Rain's eyes fluttered back open, as she crested the wave of painkiller high and came back down to earth, as she realized exactly what she just said, and that I'd heard every word. Lucid, all here, she stared back at me, caught. Rain. It's just the morphine talking. No grin, no energy, no bright Rain. Rain, I can't let that one go. What did you mean? And then she grinned and laughed, and I thought I'd lost her again, but she said, okay, that was a real transparent Porky, I respect you more than that. And no. Wait. I held up a hand in panic. I wanted to know everything about Rain, but I was terrified everything would change. You're sick, you've been shot, you need to rest, it doesn't dash. And hey. She shrugged. You've got Zheng now, maybe you don't need me dash. Rain. I snapped, anger flaring from somewhere hidden in secret. Stop thinking like that. Right now. I love you, you idiot. She met my eyes as if surprised to hear that, then sighed her way into a smile, nodding slowly but still shaking. That's good. Yeah. It is good, because without you there's no such thing as me. There's flesh and blood, sure, she nodded down at the dressing on her leg with an attempted ironic smirk, but it dissolved into the cracking pain of her voice. But there's no Rain without a reference point. Rain was never fearless. Perhaps back when we first met, her burning confidence in the face of the unnatural could have convinced me otherwise, in my falsely sheltered naivety. But we'd shared too much intimacy for me to elevate her to that particular pedestal. I had become all too familiar with the mechanics of self-risk, of sacrifice, and of deciding that certain things are more important than fear. To believe Rain's bravery effortless would do her a grand injustice. I have watched Rain face down monsters without flinching, and fight them without a second thought. I have cowered behind her while she stood between me and certain death, and I listened her laugh without care. I have followed her stride into dark places without hesitation, seen her challenge ancient undead creatures and professional psychopaths alike to knife-fight duels, and heard the ring of unstoppable burning certainty in her voice. And she did all of that without magic, or regenerative tissue, or pneumosomatic tentacles. A soft, squishy, vulnerable human being. She knows fear, as truly as I do. But that is not true courage. A wiser person than I once said that courage is not a man with a gun in his hand. I admire Rain, for standing up to creatures and sights and places that any sensible human being should run screaming from. But that is not what is most remarkable about the woman I love. Far more worthy of awe was her decision to invite me into her life in the first place. She has trusted me with almost everything. Me, Heather, a traumatized mess, not pretty, and not much fun. Fussy, stuffy, weird little Heather, who brought into Rain's life mostly just danger and problems, who might not even be human anymore, who wanted to grow alien limbs and swim the infinite dark and pit myself against a outer being I could never hope to best. I was quite possibly the most high-maintenance girlfriend imaginable, but she hadn't hesitated. Not once. She had given freely of herself. She had loved me, with only one final reservation. And now she was at her most vulnerable in the one way I believe truly counted for her, not because she'd been shot in the leg, not because she was in hospital, not because her back teeth were swimming in morphine, but because the foundations of her identity had been threatened. She did not know what to do, had no way out, and no route forward. She thought she was beaten before she'd even started. But she'd done it anyway. She had revealed herself as a sculpture of spun glass in my trembling grip, and trusted me to be very, very gentle. That was bravery. There's no Rain without a reference point. I echoed back at her. Rain, dressed in a pale green hospital gown that looked about as flattering as a mat of anemic seaweed, her eyes bloodshot and ringed with the kind of dark internal exhaustion I usually only saw in the mirror, pupils dilated wide with opiate painkiller in her bloodstream, face drawn and pale, her hair a wild mess, a bullet hole in her leg closed with stitches and gauze and bandage, one arm hooked up to drips and machines, managed a nod. She was shaking. All over. Tears brimmed in her eyes, her breath came in little jerks and starts. Even that nod had cost her. I pulled her into a hug. It was a little awkward, with her sitting on the edge of the hospital bed and me standing up, my knees bumping against the thick plastic railing that could be raised to stop a patient rolling out of the covers. It was odd feeling taller than her, with her chestnut brown hair tickling my cheek, her arms going around my waist and gripping hard. It was weird the way my pneumosomatic tentacles tried to help, to enclose her in a safe warm cocoon of me that she couldn't feel. But it didn't matter how awkward this was, we could both have been filthy and covered in blood, and I would never have let go. She shook in my grip, so I squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and felt her tears making a wet patch on my shoulder. After what seemed like minutes, I said, "We can just stay like this, if you want." And Rain swallowed, and tried again with a quivering smile in her voice. "And crab walk home? Local dykes vow to never let go, impossible to get anything done. If that's what you want." "I can't," she murmured. Slowly, carefully, and very reluctantly, Rain pulled away. She did not want to leave the hug, but seemed almost pulled by some inexorable counterforce inside her own muscles, but then she gripped my forearms instead. Anchored herself on me. She shuddered like a derailed train, or a clock shaking itself apart because some tiny gear had slipped out of position. The soft machine of Rain's body did not know what to do, stuck between an impossible return and painful forward motion, and for once this was a problem she couldn't solve by readying herself for violence. Seeing her like this hurt. Seeing my dashing, heroic, rakish Rain crying and wounded. I wanted to take her home and feed her healthy foods and tuck her into bed. I wanted to tell her everything was going to be okay, she didn't need to lift a finger, physically or mentally. She needed to rest, to close her eyes and not think too hard. I wanted to stroke her hair until she fell asleep and listen to her breathing to make sure she wasn't having any bad dreams. I wanted to take responsibility for changing the dressing on her leg, preparing her meals, running her a bath could she bathe, with her leg like that? I would do it for her then, sponge bath style, and I wasn't even remotely joking. I wanted to lie, say I'd forget all of this, if only she would rest. But that would be a betrayal of the trust she'd placed in me by speaking. I was so scared of hurting her. No rain without a reference point, I echoed a second time, gentle, trying to cushion her with my words. I'd love to know what that means. Do you want to share? Rain took a great shuddering breath and started crying in earnest. She didn't sob, but tears began rolling down her cheeks. She swallowed hard and shrugged, as a half-laugh accompanied a terrible mockery of her usual confident grin, a twitching broken thing that flickered onto her face. Yes and also no, she managed. Never have before. Then she picked up the morphine dosing button attached to her drip line again, and pressed the big red button to ask the machine for more not-caring juice. Rain, it's okay, it's going to be okay. Ah, who am I kidding? I'm obvious. Evie's probably got me all figured out anyway. I wouldn't be so sure about that. I don't think Evie knows everything about you. Rain's awful rictus grin flickered up again. Lady of Mystery, am I? Sometimes. I said it as affectionately as I could, but that wasn't enough. Guilt and pain deepened behind Rain's eyes as she raised the morphine button again. It's a trap, you know, she said, crying and laughing and shaking all at the same time. The button doesn't actually give you more unless it's time for the dose. It's just to stop you calling the nurses. She kept pressing it anyway. Rain, here, Rain. I tried to take her face in my hands, to wipe away her tears, but she was flying apart in my embrace. Rain, you're not going to break us. You're not going to break our relationship by opening up. I won't let you. I love you, and then you took a bullet for me, you idiot. I don't care how complicated or confusing or weird or unique you are inside. I don't care if you're I hiccuped. A sociopath. Or if you've got really bad dissociative identity disorder and there's a dozen of you in there, or if you're I don't know, a lizard in a person suit. Yay lizard people, in that case. It sounded funny, but I wasn't laughing. I can probably extrapolate some of it myself, but I don't want to get it wrong, I don't want to get you wrong, you deserve better, and you're not going to break us. I'm not going to reject you. Rain forced down 3 sharp breaths like she was drowning. No, she said. I'm not afraid that. Come on Heather, we both know I'm far too hot for you to ever give me up. Rain. I tutted gently. Hey, I'm deadly serious. No, really. You think I'm joking? I rolled the dice. I think you're trying to deflect with humor, maybe trying to get your defenses back up so you can feel safe again. But you don't need defenses, not with me. I promise. Rain, I promise. Rain laughed through her tears, unstable and warbling. Not deflection. It's all just me. All me, all over, all the time. 24/7, 365. Every second I draw a breath, it's me. That's not what's messing me up, Heather. I'm not scared of you rejecting me. I'm scared of breaking myself. I hiccuped. Loudly. Then I won't let you do that either, I said. To my surprise, Rain blinked at me and nodded and took a long, slow, steadying breath that filled her lungs but somehow seemed to deflate her at the same time. She wiped her eyes on her arm and looked away from me, out of the darkening windows. The rain had picked up again, plunging the city beyond into true night an hour or two ahead of schedule, forming streaks down the glass against the backdrop of Sharrowford streetlights. Rain glanced at the closed door to the hospital room. She was orienting herself in space, trying to peel back the layers of opiate high and opiate fog and opiate cushion. The subtle sounds of the hospital reached us, beeping machines and shuffling feet and soft voices and television chatter, muffled by dozens of walls and miles of insulation and pipe and cable and wipe-clean wall and the living bodies of hundreds of people. This should be happening at home. But important things rarely happen where they should. Rain needed help, right now, and if I spouted some weak platitude about how I was always there for her, then she might never reach for help again. Still, a thorn of guilt lodged in my chest. Was this the only way to have this talk? While she was on morphine? Her eyes lingered on the door. If Twill returns with Lozzie, I'll make them wait in the corridor, I said, trying to compensate for the guilt. Out of earshot. If Lozzie eavesdrops, I will get angry with her. I mean it, I'll shout at her. I'll be furious, and she'll cry, and I'll tell her off anyway and dash. "'S'all right," Rain murmured. Like a puppet with her strings tugged, she suddenly drew herself up and took a deep breath. She rolled her shoulders back and tilted her chin up and looked me right in the eye, and suddenly I was the one feeling a little touch of fear, as she woke her physicality, her muscles, her taut stomach and the tilt of her chin, the flex of her biceps and the power in her back as she puffed her chest out. She reached up and ran a hand through her hair, opened her mouth with the kink of a grin, started to say a word. And fell apart all over again. This mock-up of her usual self collapsed back into a single shivering sob. She lost it, groped for me again, clutching for support. Tears ran down her cheeks as the words stuck in her throat. She shook so hard I thought she was about to have a seizure. "Rain, it's okay, you don't have to pretend to be Dash. I am a conscious and deliberate construction." She panted the words out hard and painful, like regurgitating a jagged rock. "Always have been," she carried on with superhuman effort. "Everything I do, everything I am, is something I choose. All the time." I waited, nodding, wide-eyed both inside and out. But that seemed to be all. "Okay." She let out a huge sigh and grinned a real grin at last, not through the tears and the shaking but part of them, effortless, as if saying those words and drawn back all her confidence. "Oh wow, it's real, what they say. Truth really does set you free. Never said these things out loud before." I blinked at her, but that seemed to be the long and short of it. Apparently that was meant to make full sense. "Okay. Okay, that's okay," I tried. "Rain, I won't think any less of you if you admit to feeling scared when you're protecting confidence. That's normal, I think. You can be a mess and scared and weak and I still love you. I don't care if your hero thing is a front and Dash." "No," she actually snapped. "No, I am not a fake." I almost jumped out of my skin, would have stumbled back if she hadn't been gripping my forearms, her fingers digging into my flesh. Rain, angry, losing control, blinking at me through hot tears in suddenly clear eyes. "Oh okay, Rain, I'm sorry, I Dash. It's not a front over some real me, it is me. I think, I am." She almost struggled to say it, to believe it herself. "None of me is fake, nothing I've chosen to do is false, or a front, or an act. None of it. Choosing doesn't make me any less real. I'm real. I am. I'm real." She'd said that once before. In the medieval metaphysics room. To a certain theatrical outsider. A ball of lead settled in my belly. Shock turned to a shiver of cold sweat down my back. Rain must have seen the change on my face, because she let go of my arms and held her hands up, horrified, like she'd caught herself about to hit me. I stepped back from her and turned my head to look out of the window, at a memory of less than a reflection. At the shimmer of yellow I'd seen when we'd opened the door to this secluded hospital room. If this was rain filtered through morphine and stress, that was one thing. We could deal with that, together. But if she had been pressured into this emotional breakdown, I was about to write a very sharp theater critique. Hey, Heather, I'm sorry," Rain was saying. "You didn't deserve that. I know you didn't mean that, it just set me off." "What?" I blinked back at her, my mind already moving 17 steps ahead of where she'd fallen before I realized what she must have assumed. "No, Rain, no, you're fine. You didn't upset me. Listen, very carefully. Did anybody visit you here, in this hospital room, before I arrived? Rain blinked her tears away and all her shaking stopped. She focused on my words with an effort of will. Bless her, she is incredible, I thought to myself. Even in the middle of what might be the worst emotional crisis of her life, my tone of practical concern, of dangerous mystery, of potential threat, sharpened her mind to a razor's edge. Rain deals with stuff, that's what she does. Even with a bullet wound in her leg and a hole through her heart. The doctors, a couple of nurses, she said. Lozzie was in here. That's all. Nobody said anything odd, to you? She shook her head. Her eyes flickered to the door, alert and ready. No, no, I sighed and stepped back to her and awkwardly touched her head to make her look away from the door. Don't do that. We're not about to be in a fight. It's not that. Oh. She smiled an ironic, self-deprecating smile. Pity. Would a helped, probably. Not that I've got a knife on me. You didn't bring my knife, did you? No, I didn't fancy getting arrested if the detective decided to search me. Why would he frisk you? She laughed, a little weak. Well, I am carrying that little can of pepper spray you gave me. I sighed. Which is illegal enough in the first place, so I may as well have brought the knife along too, I suppose. Heather. Rain smiled, impressed. We'll make an urban commando out of you yet. Listen, Rain, I'll just say it plainly. You are telling me all this of your own volition, yes? Yeah, she said. She wasn't crying anymore, but the return to topic drew the smile from her face and put a quiver in her voice. I want to. Even if this is the end for me. Even if it destroys me. Better to go out with a bang, hey? I won't let it. She pulled this pained smile, and I realized that Rain had finally encountered something she believed was beyond me. I thought 7 shades of sunlight had gotten to you, I said. Gotten into your head, perhaps. Rain raised an eyebrow at me. Oh. Nah. If she'd insulted me again, about this, I would a done for her. Knife or no knife. I can believe that. Rain nodded, and glanced down at her hands, making and unmaking her fists. She didn't try to sit up and look cool this time, she just let the tension flow out of her shoulders. She relaxed, consciously, muscle by muscle, until she was throttled all the way down to the lowest possible ebb, idling to keep the engines ticking over. I had the sudden terrible and certain knowledge that in that precise moment, Rain was just as dangerous as she was at full tension with a knife in her hand. It was like standing in front of a coiled cobra. My mouth went very dry. I've never hidden anything from you, Heather, she said. I just haven't told you, a big sigh, a sad smile. Where the hell do I start? I'm pretty sure you've been hiding some real emotions. Some. Poorly, I might add. Emotions, no. You get me raw and unfiltered, believe it or not. Like I said, I'm no act. A constant ongoing process of self-creation. All the time. But no act. Okay, I allowed, and did my best to believe. But I've told you one lie. Told it to Evelyn too. Told it to everyone who's ever asked. And that lie is? I hiccuped. Rain, please. Remember when I told you my parents kicked me out? That's how I ended up homeless before I met Evie. Yes. Well, they didn't. I blinked at her. That's your big dark secret? Yeah. I mean, hey, they were probably about to. But I beat them to the punch, left before they could get around to it. You can't sack me, I quit. Anyone asks about my family, that's what I tell them, parents kicked me out because they found me necking with a girl. They hated me enough to do it, stuck up Little Englander godbotherers with a butch dyke daughter, course that was gonna end bad. Best of my knowledge they've never looked for me. An easy lie, because most of it's true. Rain grinned and laughed. That means a lot, from you. What is that, your entire year's swearing allowance? I'm making an exception for them. Thanks. Really? Even after wow, what, 7 years now? Nearly. Even after all that time, that's nice to hear. I squeezed Rain's shoulder. She kissed my wrist and rested her head against the inside of my arm for a moment. But that's not why I left, she said. Then why? Because I had no purpose, Rain said. Without purpose, if I'd stayed, I'd probably have killed them both. Rain's eyes bored into mine, and I realized she'd stopped smiling. My throat closed up, I couldn't swallow. Was she watching me for the correct reaction? Part of me attempted to pull an ironic smile, puff out a little laugh, as if she'd cracked a bad joke. But I couldn't even twitch my lips. I dunno, maybe I should have done. Rain rekindled her smile and shrugged. Maybe they deserved it. Maybe I've got a little brother or sister I don't know about now, dealing with their shit all alone, 'cause I'm not there. Maybe I shoulda killed my parents. But it wouldn't have had any purpose, and that's worse. You're not even remotely exaggerating, are you? I don't think you're a dash. A sociopath, she finished for me. Maybe not. Sociopaths aren't supposed to have any impulse regulation, any empathy. But I got both of those. At least, I know I do. Because I choose to. I nodded, guilty in my own relief. Yes, you've never seemed like a real sociopath, not really. But you're able to, you know. An echo of Rain's smug grin ghosted behind her bloodshot eyes. Violence, she said. Yeah. Comes easy for me, and I enjoy it. I do. I enjoy it because I'm good at it, because it's what I was made for, but only when I have a purpose. Rain reached up to brush a lock of hair away from my cheek and tuck it behind my ear. Perhaps she was testing to see if I would shy away from her touch, perhaps she just wanted to let me know she was still mine, or perhaps the gesture had no meaning at all, merely an animal reaction to being face to face with her mate, her lover. I did not move away. Does that frighten you? She asked, smile a little sad. Do I frighten you? I let out a gigantic sigh I hadn't known I was holding and gave her an eye roll worthy of the grumpiest of teenage sulks, mostly to cover for the way she was making me quiver inside, how the spark of her words and her easy intensity had set a low fire burning deep down in my belly. Don't be so perfectly absurd, I said. She blinked twice at me, genuinely clueless. It probably should frighten me, I carried on. It's supposed to, any sensible girl would run a mile, but no. You know full well that I'm turned on by that sort of thing, that I don't know. Blushing furiously, I averted my eyes. If you're weird and unique and deviant, then congratulations, you found the one girl who fits you like a puzzle piece. Rain's grin blossomed across her face. She didn't say a word, she didn't need to. I blushed and huffed. None of this explains no Rain without a reference point, I said. You said you don't know where to start, why not try the beginning? Ah, the beginning, yeah. Rain nodded and managed to keep a straight face as she said, I was born at a very young age. Rain, I tooted. That's the second time you've made that joke. And I didn't speak a word until I was 8. That drew me up sharpish. I blinked at her, trying to work out if she was joking. Selective mutism, she said, soft and calm and a little sad. Technical term, that's what the doctors said. But they got that wrong, because, hey, they didn't know what they were looking at. Kids with selective mutism, that's from trauma, or an anxiety disorder, and I wasn't anxious. There was no me to feel anxious. Slowly, feeling a desperate need to be closer to her, I sank down until I was sitting on the bed at Rain's side, still touching. Go on. She shrugged. I dunno how to explain it. Don't think you'll find it in any diagnostic manual. I tooted. That doesn't mean anything. I should know. Rain smirked. I guess it was like being dissociated, all the time. Maybe I did have some kind of rare identity disorder, I dunno. It was like I had no ego. I knew I was different to other kids, that bit was kind of obvious. Parents thought I might be autistic, but it's not that either. It's just me. Over time I started mimicking things I read, and bits of other people, but it was all conscious, I had to do it deliberately. I had to build myself, and I chose every brick. Then you chose some good bricks, I said, because I wanted Rain to feel good about herself. You know it. Once I built enough to be a real person, that was about when I realized I'm real good at violence. Oh. Cut my teeth on school playground bullies. Never pulled the wings off flies or tortured cats or anything, so I thought, hey, can't be a psycho. But then there was this incident. I was 10, I think, and I broke another kid's ribs. Bigger kid, actually. Some unimportant fight, he was bullying some other boy, just kids being kids. Didn't even matter who. But I just thought, hey, if I keep hitting him, he can never do this again, so I did. You broke somebody's ribs at 10? I gaped at her. I mean, I had a rock. Okay. Rain laughed. It's no different than what I do for you. I suppose so. I tried to imagine tyke-sized Rain, beating the snot out of some other kid, a rock in her hand, until the dry crack of shattering rib bones. It was all too easy. Made me shiver, and for once not in a good way. He lived. I didn't kill him or anything. 2 ribs broken. Things got kinda messy after that, she said. But the school dealt with it. When I got a little older, I realized I like girls, and that made things easier. I can relate to that part. Bet you were never like me though. Her eyes flashed darkly amused even through her emotional exhaustion. I was wild. I laughed softly. I can imagine, Rain, I dash. Okay. I suppose that's I felt myself blush. You're thinking something like I wouldn't have turned that down. Trust me, you absolutely would have done. If you say so. I needed violence, Heather. Violence or sex, or at least sexuality. Those were the only things holding me together. And neither was enough, neither was purpose. I couldn't finish building me, and I was spinning faster and faster. Her voice got shaky again and she had to blink away the memories. When my parents were gonna throw me out, I thought that might be what I needed. Get away from all these in-groups that weren't really in-groups, get myself alone so I could figure out what was me and what was just adaptation, what I was supposed to do, what my purpose was. I wanted to know what I was for. And you were for Evelyn? Not at first. Rain's voice had taken on that breathy quiver again, the weight of memory pressing on her chest. I wasn't just homeless, though that's bad enough. Ask anybody who has been. I went feral. I stopped thinking. It was like being a kid again, there was less and less of me to hold on to. Turns out without any reference points, without an anchor, I just slip away. Rain. I wanted to hug her, but she needed to keep going. And then I found Evie, yeah. And I knew this was the only way to function. The thing I'd been missing my entire life, the thing I should have been born with. Somebody to protect. Purpose. As she spoke, she brightened like a sword in the forge, hot enough to burn to the fingers, eyes like molten steel. My heart skipped a beat. I was almost gone when I first saw Evie, she was saying. I think that's why I accepted all this magic shit so easy, when it was right in front of my eyes. I was already vestigial. When I rebuilt myself alongside Evie, I was just reincorporating that stuff. That's why it doesn't bother me much, I think. I still remember the moment. I was sitting on the wall of that estate, gonna break in, don't recall why. She'd been allowed out into the garden to walk around, chaperoned by 2 somethings not unlike Zheng. A smile, almost manic, flickered on Rain's lips, an echo perhaps of how she used to be. And then I saw her. Small, fragile, limping, hunched. And she didn't like those zombies at her side. Oh no, she didn't want to be there at all. She was as close to destruction as I was. And I knew. Rain leaned in close, eyes wide, and gripped my shoulder. I'd never seen her like this before, in the throes of an almost religious ecstasy. I knew. My violence, everything I am, has a purpose I could choose for myself. Protect this girl I didn't even know. That's what I'm for. Speechless, I just nodded. And I felt the same thing when I first saw you, she told me. My knight-errant, I murmured without meaning to, then blushed tomato red, stammering. Sorry, Rain, I don't mean to make light dash. No, exactly. She lit up with a grin. Exactly. Heather. It's what my violence is for. It's what all violence should be for. She laughed with self-conscious irony. Protecting those who cannot protect themselves. That thing back in medieval metaphysics room, remember that? The doll dressed like me? The thing Seven Shades made? Of course I do. Well, it wasn't wrong. I thought back to that cruel mockery of Rain, dressed in patchwork, wrapped in garden wire. The wires, the two red wires wrapped around it, I spelled out slowly, as much for myself as Rain. They represented what? Sex. And violence? No. Oh, Heather. No. Rain shook her head and smiled with hot tears returning to her eyes, such pain I wanted to kiss it off her lips. The wires holding me together are you and Evelyn. My heart did a little flip. Oh. Yes. Of course. Generalized sex and violence, sleeping around, getting in pub fights, none of that is enough. It's like style without substance. Empty calories. It'll kill me. I have to have a reference point, a foundation to build myself on. An in-group to protect. A family? I don't know. There's no me without being needed. I never expected you and I to turn out like this, but I fell for you, Heather, hard. And now I need you, I need to be what you need. Rain finished with a sigh like the world leaving her. She didn't wait for me to reply, didn't expect anything profound, but only laughed a sad little laugh as she wiped her eyes on the shoulder of her hospital gown. She groped for the morphine dosing button again and pressed it a couple of times, but the machine failed to deliver. Well, she said eventually, into the growing silence which I could not fill. Well, there I am. That's all of me. Sorry, Heather, for having to show you behind the curtain and ruin your dash. Rain, shut up. I grabbed her face in both hands and kissed her. I kissed her in the kind of way that two people in a hospital room should not be kissing, lest an unfortunate nurse walk in on them and drop her tray of medical instruments like a cartoon. I kissed her in the kind of way one cannot fake, with a frantic need to communicate a concept that cannot be put into words, a desire to inhale her scent, taste her mouth, consume and imbibe and drink in everything that made her. Rain would have called it necking, if I'd let her come up for air. Later on, I called it emergency affection. We parted, both panting, Rain flushed in the face and blinking at me. I touched a fingertip to my lips, her taste still in my mouth, shocked at my own response. See how you like being taken by surprise for a change, I thought. Have you ever read Robinson Crusoe? I asked. Rain blinked at me again, and mercy of mercies, blessed be the contours of her face and the beating of her heart, she smiled in bemused incomprehension. I promise it'll make sense, just trust me to get there, I flustered. This is the only way I have to explain this. Have you, or not? Rain shrugged, still smiling. She wasn't crying anymore. She was interested, excited to listen to me being a weird literary goblin who couldn't explain half of what was in her own head without referencing a book. I know the story, she said. Kinda. Much as anybody does. Crusoe is a fantasy. A total fantasy. I babbled at high speed, losing control in my desire to make her see what I saw. He's shipwrecked, but he builds a shelter, a house. He creates this whole mini-version of European society alone, just exploiting the island and his surroundings and other life, and it's a lie, Rain. Do you know what happened to the kinds of real people the novel was based on? Real castaways on real islands. They mostly ended up very, very mentally ill from isolation. Living on lichen and rats, drinking seal blood, sleeping in caves at best. It's all a fantasy. Nobody is an island. Nobody stands alone. Not even you. Rain blinked at me, and I realized she was blinking back more tears, softer this time. Ah. You've had to do consciously what most people do without thinking about it, I carried on. We all have to make identity, and nobody can do that in isolation. I felt like I was reaching into a well, to pull her up, like our fingers had just brushed and I had to strain a little further. Nobody's an island, Rain. Isolation drives anybody to insanity. And I mean that literally, that's not colorful language. You're just describing a more extreme version of what everybody does, and I don't love you any less for it. But will you still need me? She asked, quiet and grim. Rain, even if you were an invalid, if you couldn't walk, couldn't hold a knife. If I had to wipe your bottom for you and spoon feed you, I wouldn't stop needing you, because I'm in love with you. And maybe you're the one not understanding this. Love is a choice too. No, Heather, it's not a choice like I have to make all the time, of what to be dash. Yes it is. Rain, it is a choice. I made it. I can't unmake it. I looked down to the mass of bandage and gauze around her left thigh, and very gently touched the edge of the dressing, and realized my fingers were shaking. This is my fault, Rain. You got hurt, Evelyn got hurt too. Taking Lozzie, or Zheng, or even Preem, outside. That's one thing. But you and Evie, you're just human beings in the end. Not like me. You got hurt. You can protect me, yes, but sometimes I'm going to protect you. Rain opened her mouth, tears shining in her eyes, and for the first time I could remember, she closed it without knowing what to say. She bit her lip, struggling inside, the machine trying to shunt itself back onto its own tracks with emergency power and elbow grease. She needed one final shove. When she said the words, they came out so tiny, so small, the truest of her fears. But that's not what I'm for, she said. But it's what I need you to be. I had to wring my own hands together to stop them shaking as I waited for the shot to land. I'd taken the best option I could see, grabbed Rain as hard as I could, braced my legs to pull her up from the hole she'd fallen into, but she had to want it, and she was staring at me, wide-eyed and blank-faced, bloodshot and the lowest she'd ever been. And what if I'd misunderstood? What if I didn't get her at all? What if I'd hurt her or failed or... And suddenly she laughed and coughed at the same time, panting with a hysterical fragility. She smiled and shook her head and wiped the thread of tears away on her arm. Does that? I couldn't help myself. I hiccuped. Does that help? If you need, I could take that BA-. No. Rain came up in a huge grin, shaking her head. No, you never get to take that back. Never. Heather, you are too clever by half. A nervous little smile pulled onto my lips too. And that's why you love me. One of many reasons, my dear. Shall I enumerate the stars in the sky? Rain's grin grew self-consciously theatrical, and before I could stop her, she was getting to her feet, standing up and turning to face me with an ironic little bow like a courtier, absurd in her green hospital gown. Her eyes were shining, no longer with tears. Thine beauty and wit are beyond counting, the strength of thy limbs and the spirit of thy brow something. She collapsed into laughter. I've lost my train of thought, Heather. Thank you. Rain, I tooted softly, blushing. Improvised, ye old poetry is not the way to win my heart. I've already won it, haven't I? She winked. And you need to rest, I tooted. I need to dance, more like. I could dance with you right now, you know. Spin you round the room and sweep you off your feet. Don't. But also, good. Are you feeling dash? Never better. She sighed and shot me a little salute. Your psychopath construct girlfriend is ready to resume being herself. Rain. Don't say like that you're going to close up. I've never been closed. And this ain't no act. She leaned forward, planted her hands either side of my thighs on the bed, and drew in close, suppressing a wince as she put weight through her wounded leg muscle. The position made my heart leap, even more inappropriate than the kiss earlier. It's just me, she said. We need to talk about us. I went squeaky in front of her sudden aggression. Sometime. And jealousy. And zheng. But not right now. You've had enough for one night. Oh. Rain's lips kinked. I don't think I've had anywhere near enough of you. Now that is the morphine talking, I squeaked. A knock on the door, 3 short raps forced us apart like a pair of teenagers in a bad melodrama, or at least it would have if Rain had been able to straighten up fast enough, or cared enough to try. I was left to do all the work of making it seem like we hadn't been about get intimate on a hospital bed, scooting back and sideways. The door opened on cue and Twill stood there in the doorway, paused, and raised her eyebrows. Heather, you were supposed to put her to bed, not bed her, she said. I'm not. I blushed a deep red as Rain straightened up and laughed. Yeah, Twill, Rain shot back. Get it right. I'm the one doing the bedding here. Rain. I hissed, and swatted at her arm. Whatever. Save for at home, Twill grunted. No coppers coming back to talk to you two in a minute or something, right? Nobody else has been in yet, I told her. Why? And where's Lozzie? You did find her, didn't you? Twill sighed and shrugged and looked back over her shoulder, down the length of the hospital corridor, and gestured with a nod. A second later, Lozzie appeared in all her fluttery, flouncy glory of pastel poncho and bouncing braid, happy to see us from beneath her heavy eyelids. Both of her arms were hidden all the way inside her poncho, folded around her midsection as she hunched forward, as if nursing a stomach ache. Oh, Lozzie, there you are, I sighed in relief. Are you okay? Are you feeling sick or something? Sneaking mission success. Lozzie announced with a fey little giggle. She skipped into the room and Twill pulled the door shut behind her, closing the 4 of us in. Found her in the canteen, Twill said. But I had to hang around to, play lookout, like. I think hiding from the Rosers has got her kinda hyper. She was trying to sound unimpressed, but couldn't quite get there. I blinked, uncomprehending. Lasagna. Lozzie announced. She straightened up and used an elbow to flip up the hem of her poncho. Like a stage magician revealing an animal beneath a cloak. Cradled in her arms lay a stack of 4 transparent plastic food containers, the kind one might obtain from a hospital canteen. Each one held a very sloppy and meaty-looking lasagna. Lasagana. Lasaga, went Lozzie. Did you steal those? I asked. No. I charmed a lunch lady. She was very pretty. You mean you sweet-talked her, yes? You didn't hypnotize canteen staff or something? Lozzie? She was very convincing. And technically didn't lie, Twill told me, as Lozzie set about tucking the boxed lasagnas into a carrier bag she'd apparently lifted from elsewhere. I boggled, Twill shrugged, and Rain went, lasagna. You seem more with it, Twill said to Rain. So, got shot, huh? Rain winked and pointed double finger guns at Twill. First time. Last time, I said with an unintended whip crack in my voice. Rain pretended to flinch and salute, then winced hard. Ow. Okay, she said. Still bruised from where I fell over after the bullet. Feels like I've been kicked in the arse with a steel boot. Morphine only does so much. She waved off my useless gesture of comfort. What would I do, anyway? Rub her backside? Do as she says, please, Rain, I told her. Yes ma'am, right away ma'am, my pleasure ma'am, said Rain, but she finally sat down, with a wince as she grasped her leg, and let out a long breath as she stretched out on the bed. I put my hand in hers. We still waiting for the doctors, right? Twill asked. To give Rain her marching orders and all that? I nodded. I'm staying right here with Rain until she's discharged, I said. And I suggest you both do as well. And then we're all going home. We have a lot of pieces to pick up. Where's Stack? Rain asked. Under lock and key. Under Zheng, I said. Don't think about her yet, please. I'm going to eat so much lasagna, Lozzie stage whispered. Twill twisted her head sideways to look at the dressing on Rain's leg, and let out a low whistle. Saw big one alright. Yeah, might have to borrow Evie's stick for a few weeks, said Rain. They were looking at each other. Lozzie was looking at her pilfered food, and for a brief moment only I was looking at the wide windows out onto the night. Our reflections stood in the darkness, broken up into static by Rain and the distant lights of Sharrowford at night. Lozzie, Twill, Rain on the bed, and me, sitting, looking back at myself. My reflection winked. Good show, mouthed Seven Shades of Sunlight as me, in private silence.